afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? I hope so. Can you give me a 5x5 in the chat if you all can hear me okay? Is the music too loud? Happy days, Swift. So today we have, there's quite a lot of migration and immigration things going on today. We have stuff by the Home Affairs Committee. We also have in the House of Lords as well today coming up, the mitigation, the prevalence of homeless refugees and the impact on local authorities over the Christmas period. Well, I think homelessness is a problem, big problem anyway, but why is it refugees? You know, are they not housed in hotels? And this Bibby Stockholm fiasco that happened yesterday in the wake of this debate today. What do people think? Drop your comment in the chat. Hopefully that should have took the music down a little bit. Hope. Well, we'll get to it. That debate's happening at 3 o'clock in the House of Lords. But we are going to go on to the Home Affairs Committee and listen to that. Hi, everybody. I don't like going on camera yet. I ain't got my new teeth. But they will be here soon. Can't see underneath my camera. Can you hear my dog? I don't think you can yet. My dog is snoring in the background. But we'll have a look. Don't want you to see any of that. So this is what we got coming up today. Well, let's say hello to everyone first. Hello, Dan, Transporter, MG, Andrew, Matthew. Good afternoon, everybody. Swift and Bold, welcome. Bit chilling music. Do you like my Christmas tree? Chrissy Christmas tree. You like it? Yeah, I do. So I thought I'd come on a little bit early, just to make sure the microphone and everything's working okay and you can hear me fine, which is good. I'll get my new teeth next week, so I'll be speaking really funny as of next week. It will be beginning very, very shortly. Let's see what people are saying. You love the flag? Yeah. Anonymous gave me that. Anonymous used to have like an antique store with a lot of iniquities and things like that. He had lots of interesting stuff in his shop. And before he closed it down, because everything takes its toll during lockdown, didn't it? He sent me that flag, so thank you, Anonymous. Big thumbs up to you there, mate. I haven't really used it because I haven't been in the studio, have I? I didn't go in it at all this year because I didn't really have a computer, but now I've got a proper one. Can get back down there again next spring. I should hope so. So what's this? They said 300 on the Bobby out of possible 500 overcrowded. No privacy, anything. Residents that way. Is that the Bibby Stockholm? Now, yeah. Sorry. Let's get rid of this music so we can start talking about this. Now, with the Bibby Stockholm, they got doctors, dentists, gym. So, what do you mean, no privacy? It's like living on a floating hotel, isn't it? At the end of the day, what can you mean? What's so bad? There's people that's living in a fucking cardboard box, isn't there? You know, this is the whole optics. I think personally, it's optics for this whole Rwanda business, which is never going to happen. It's all smokes and mirrors. Yeah. Dreyford resign. I did say yay earlier, but I was stand corrected. It will probably be a British citizen by paper that becomes the next Welsh First Minister. It wouldn't be somebody, you know what I mean? It'd be Welsh by paper or, British by paper. Whatever. It definitely won't be somebody that was born in this country. Am I allowed to say that anymore? I have to, take stock of my political correctness on this channel, because we will have the lefties crying. Anyway, I don't give a fuck anymore. I'm English and I'm proud. And if that makes me racist, then so be it. English are the most unrepresented race in the world. And that's a fact. Prove me wrong. I should get that sign, innit? English is the most underrepresented race in the world. Prove me wrong. Yeah. It is, though, isn't it? So we got 5 minutes before this this debate, whatever happens. Who knows? Let's see how many we got on. 62 of you watching. Make sure I've got 62 likes. There's 36 at the moment. Make sure I got 62, please, people. I would be much appreciated. Yeah, but you can't be English anymore without being racist, can you? Is that, not a fact? If you're English, you're racist. If you're white, you're racist. Yeah. Got to be said now, isn't it? It's how people are. I would say the average Joe on the street is thinking like that now. The working class man, well, I'm most certainly thinking like that now. What's this? Indigenous English, someone who has been here at least prior to Tony Blair's criminality. That's a good one, John. I like that. Yeah. See, yeah, where does it? I expect they pump it off, don't they? They must have holding tanks on board. And it must get pumped out. Must have like septic tanks. But that is good. Some of us freedom of information is, the whole thing. So this will begin shortly. I can't go onto the screen yet until it actually starts. The debate. We'll just have to wait for it, won't we? I see GB citizens living in sewage hostels all the time. The Bibi is a privilege to live. It's quite true because how many million was spent on the Bibi before anybody moved aboard? So everything was new, wasn't it? I quite like to live aboard a ship, you know? This is quite a unique video. This is quite true. How many lives are not mentioned through suicide? RGB, yet an immigrant takes its life or loses life, and MSN all over it. It's the narrative, isn't it? It fits the narrative. You know, it's a bit like when the high-rise flat burned in Bristol. It was at the beginning of the year. A migrant fell to his death. He'd only been in this country a few months. He was living with relatives. He was a dinghy diver. No mention that he sailed in on a dinghy illegally. It was just that he died falling to his death. You know, poor old migrant. Maybe if he wasn't in this country, he'd still be alive now. I know it's maybe a harsh, nasty thing to say, but life's a bitch, innit? Yeah, homeless man froze in a car the other week. And that got a couple of paragraphs. Yeah, but we got to remember, right? Can you blame the migrants? They're coming to the land of milk and honey, whereby they get a hotel, they get a little bit of money in their skyrocket, and then the ability to work illegally with Deliveroo. Then you're going to come, aren't you? Right? It's been proven fact that these migrants are earning up to £1,500 a week working illegally for Deliveroo. And I proved the fact the other night. I ordered a packet of cigarettes at 1 o'clock in the morning and through Deliveroo, and on the app it told me a Linda was coming to deliver my cigarettes, but it wasn't Linda who turned up on the bike. It was a guy that spoke fuck all English, and I thought the requirement to work for Deliveroo is that you had to speak the native language. He didn't speak nothing. It was all hand fucking gestures, you know what I mean? I thought, have I just suddenly learned BSL? You know what I mean? It was all, I didn't understand nothing. So yeah, it's proven fact that, you know, these migrants are laughing at us. Laughing. And then our government wants to look into our bank accounts to make sure we're not earning anything more than what we should do. Is this not getting on for stupidity or what? Absolutely, it's mental, isn't it? It is. It's mad to the fact is now banks, the top 6 banks or something, have to report to the DWP if you go over the threshold for savings, which is if you got more than 6,000, I think it's £6,000 in savings, your benefits get curtailed. But if you've got more than 16,000, your benefits stop completely, and the only benefits you're allowed to claim is the non-means tested ones. So yeah, it's now, you know, are they gonna? It's fucking hell. All right, mate, no worries. But I got a letter there from DWP compliance team. You know, wanting to look into my bank accounts for me to give them permission to go. I told them to fuck off. My bank is my bank. Matthew's had it. I've had it. Right, here we go. Here we go.
To examine developments in the government's Rwanda policy, including the recently agreed Rwanda-UK treaty and the safety of Rwanda asylum and immigration bill, and to understand what the Home Office's migration strategy is, including its approach to illegal migration, the impact of the Illegal Migration Act on support to victims of human trafficking, and how it intends to address legal migration.
Right.
So we've got a lot to get through today. Can I first of all welcome our witnesses, and I wondered if ministers, whether you would just like to...
Is that low for you guys? Can you hear it?
Dame Diana, thank you so much for extending the invitation to us. I was in the chamber this time last week when we were grilling the Home Secretary, saying, is the minister going to turn up to our committee next week? I was sitting next to him, little did
Hang on, guys.
that I would be the minister sitting in front of you. But here I am. My name is Michael Tomlinson, and it is my privilege to be a minister in the Home Office.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
For some reason, I can't crank
my fellow minister.
the volume.
Said I'm Tom Pursglove, the Minister for Legal Migration and the Border.
And we're very pleased to see you again, because you have
Wait,
been on
guys.
this committee before. So very nice to have you back.
Been away for a while, but back.
You're back, yes. And Mr. Hobbs, would you just like to introduce
Yes,
yourself?
so good afternoon. My name is Dan Hobbs. I'm the Director General for Migration and Borders in the Home Office.
Thank you. Before we start, I just want to extend my personal condolences.
I can't crank the volume. Hang on, I'm just finding it.
To the news yesterday around the asylum seeker who was on the Bibby Stockholm, who sadly died. Clearly, we don't have very much more information about that, but I think all our thoughts and prayers are with the friends and family of that individual, and I think I speak for the whole committee in saying that. And I think I speak for the whole committee. I think where we'd like to start today is to reflect on the session that we had with the Permanent Secretary of the Home Office and the interim second Permanent Secretary on the 29th of November. We found as a committee that session quite difficult to get information out of the officials about questions we were legitimately asking. Since then, we've had a letter from the Permanent Secretary which came yesterday, and I think we'd quite like to start
We're
just by having a look
bumping the volume, guys.
and dealing with some of the points that are contained in that letter. Now, I want to start with the legacy asylum backlog. We know that this is the anniversary of the Prime Minister on the 13th of December last year saying that he was going to pledge that the legacy backlog would be cleared by the end of this year. And it's very good to see progress has been made on that. In the letter from the Permanent Secretary, he says that on the 30th of November, there were 18,366 cases remaining for decision. I think that was out of 92,000 that we started with the legacy backlog. So huge progress, and I think that's very important.
I'm just trying to crank the volume on their end, guys.
Ask both of you actually. I don't know if you have this letter in front of you. But
I do. Which page are you referring to?
So we're on page, the third page of the letter. It says legacy asylum backlog.
Paragraph
halfway down
6 and
the
7.
page. Yes. So I just want to ask you, looking at that table for the grants of protection, the grants of other leave, refused applications and withdrawn, I just want to take you to 2023 quarter 3, where it's got grants of protection at 18,432, grants of other leave at 170, refused 4,743, and withdrawn 4,068.
Is the desktop audio still low? Because I'm cranked it as much as it can go.
At the moment, on the acceptances there, because if you add up that whole column, it gets to 27,613 cases that were being dealt with in that quarter, which is an impressive number. 18,000 are granted. That's my calculation, a 67% acceptance rate. Now, I just want to take you then to quarter 2. You look at the figures there, much smaller figures, but if you actually extrapolate from those figures, the acceptance rate there is only at 38%. So I just wondered if you might want to comment about how that has gone from 38% to 67%, when the committee was told by David Neal, who's the Chief Inspector of Immigration and Borders, that the cases that were left in the legacy backlog would be the most complicated and complex to deal with. And he was very sceptical about whether the pledge that the Prime Minister had made would actually be reached. So I just wondered what's going on.
May I start in this way? You would have seen the portfolio breakdown between the two of us. So I am going to turn to Tom in a second to look at the detail of this. But where either it's in my portfolio and Tom wants to add something, or vice versa, then so be it. And all I'd like to say, I hope that you have received, because I know that the committee requested a breakdown as to which minister was going to look at which area. I see you nodding. Thank you so much. That means you have received that. So I'm going to invite Tom to answer that directly. But if there's anything in particular that I want to come in on as well, then perhaps we can deal with it in that way.
Great, thank you.
We're very relaxed on this committee. What we're really wanting to do is to get information and data.
And
so
may I say at the outset,
whichever one of you is able to answer the questions, we are happy with.
Lovely. Well, thank you. And look, the Prime Minister was very clear that this was a priority, dealing with the legacy asylum backlog, and I am very pleased with the progress that has been made, and I'm hugely appreciative to the team.
I'm sorry, guys, that is the best
the Home Office
level, unless I can find it being played somewhere else.
In this area, and there is a lot of learning that has gone on. It's
weird as fuck.
Instead, I would argue, as we move to deal with the asylum backlog more generally, what we have seen is a fall in the last 12 months of 80% in terms of that legacy asylum backlog, and I am confident that all claims that can be decided will be decided within the time frames that the Prime Minister said would happen in that legacy asylum backlog.
You're using very careful language there. So all claims that can be decided. So you're not saying that the pledge of clearing the backlog will actually be, will see that pledge actually happen?
We will fulfil, I'm confident, the pledge to deal with all the cases that we are able to deal with within that asylum legacy backlog. And I think as well it's important to point out that you touched on the grant rate. Yeah. What we have seen is, in the various years in recent times, in 2019, the grant rate of 52%, in 2020, 46%, in 2021, 72%, in 2022, 76%. But I do expect that the refusal rate will drop in the last quarter of this year, and as we move into the flow in the new year.
Okay, can you just answer my specific question, Minister?
I am, and as Mr. Neal said, it is fair to say that a lot of the legacy backlog has been quite complex, challenging, difficult cases, and you will appreciate the fact that with the length of time that passes, often those cases get more complex by the nature of people laying down roots and all of their circumstances developing. But in terms of the commitment that we made, I believe that we will fulfil it, and I think we will also see these grant rates coming down. Right.
So why is it 67% for quarter 3 when it was 38% in quarter 2?
Well, I think what is crucial is that we make the right decisions on cases. So obviously there is a case-by-case consideration of all the different circumstances at play.
They like using big words, don't they?
That are relevant. And we will work on
You don't know. You don't really know why that's gone from 38% to 67%.
So you will appreciate that I'm familiarising myself with this aspect of the portfolio. Yeah. And these are priority areas. As I say, I genuinely believe that the grant rate will continue to fall as we move forward with this work. But we take appropriate decisions on a case-by-case. But I'm not sure if operationally Mr. Hobbs might be able to add a little bit more.
So obviously, thank you, Minister. So statistically, obviously, there's a big difference in the output as well in that quarter. Activity uptake. It will also be the fact that you'll be aware we introduced the streamlined asylum processing, particularly for high grant nationalities, than we were using a different, more efficient process. As the Minister said,
in quarter 3, though, I thought you'd done that before.
So we had started that earlier, but that matched with the productivity uptake and the increasing in the staffing will have come together. Probably for the numbers to have come through later than here. But as I say, it's as the Minister said, the grant rate in quarter 3 is not substantially out with the annual. In fact, it's below the last 2 years of annual grant rate. So I think it's the culmination of a range of activities that have happened in the operation around the streamlined processing, around dealing with those high grant nationalities. So some of those nationalities will have extremely high grant rates. If you look at Afghanistan at the moment.
Wouldn't they have been spread throughout the legacy backlog that you were dealing with in each of these quarters? I understand you're saying you had more caseworkers dealing with the cases, but actually the spread of Afghans or people from the high acceptance groups, they must have been spread evenly.
But the streamlined processing, particularly, which was deliberately targeted on that, will have borne out in the quarter 3, probably quarter 2 and quarter 3. If you look at, I can't remember the exact date when we introduced it, but it was earlier this year, that those would have flown through into those quarterly statistics.
Right, okay. And you're saying in quarter 4 then, we're going to see a reduction in the acceptance rate. Is that what you're saying?
I believe that you should expect to see a drop in the grant rate in that final quarter, yes.
Okay, so that's the explanation. Okay. Tim Lawton, would you like to deal with the issue of withdrawals?
I'd love to, Chair. Thank you very much. Welcome, Ministers. Congratulations, Mr Tomlinson, on your probation. Commiserations, Mr Pursglove, at finding yourself back in the Home Office. But last 2 weeks ago, we had, I think, what might be described as not exactly a data-rich session with the Permanent Secretary and Simon Ridley. And it turns out that those Home Office statistics which we challenged them on, in many cases, have turned out to be rather full of errors. So specifically on the question of withdrawals, to try and explain how the figures from the outstanding backlog have been reducing at a faster rate, which on the face of it is encouraging. But, so the figures we challenged Sir Matthew on was the 17,316 claims designated by the Home Office in the year ending September 2023 as having been withdrawn. And that, after some unsatisfactory exchanges, resulted in the refrain from, I think it was Simon Ridley, that no, we don't know where those 17,316 are, which was rather worrying. The letter which the Permanent Secretary has just written says that, to quote, a proportion of withdrawals have been miscategorised as other withdrawals. So in that final quarter, what I pointed out is that 95% of those withdrawals were categorised as other, and other withdrawals are an asylum claim withdrawn explicitly, for example, if the applicant signs a form to withdraw his or her application, or it's withdrawn because the applicant leaves the country prior to a decision. So my question to you now is, how have those figures been miscategorised? Because the other withdrawals, in most cases, require a physical act of filling in a form to say they no longer wish to have their application considered. So perhaps, Mr Tomlinson, as you're in charge of illegal, can you explain how there was such an error in the categorisation?
I'm going to hand straight over to the Minister, who is actually dealing with withdrawals.
Okay, the Permanent Secretary did a lot of that as well.
Well, there we go, Mr. Let's hope you don't see too much of that, and I'm sure you'll keep us rigorously to follow.
Yeah, he did a lot of that.
To set this in some context, in the year ending September 2023, there were 17,316 withdrawn asylum applications, which was more than 4 times the number in the previous year, when there were 4,260. Albanian nationals accounted for 54% of withdrawals in the year ending September 2023.
How many people has been actually sent back?
What we have
don't
seen
hear about them
relative
being
to
sent
other
back, like
nationalities,
illegal Albanians,
Albanians
shit
have
like
a high
that.
rate of withdrawing their asylum applications. This isn't surprising. What we consistently tend to see is Albanians using the asylum route, having arrived via small boat, and that being convenient in the circumstances, but actually not particularly wanting to be within the asylum system. And so that obviously accounts for a very significant chunk of the figure. And invariably, those cases flow into the immigration enforcement space, which Minister Tomlinson leads on, and things like mandatory reporting around that to try and monitor that situation, of course, with detention, the possibility as well in the circumstances to facilitate removal. There are other reasons that account for why claims are withdrawn. For example, somebody...
Yay! They finally sorted their fucking sound out.
Their claim. Or, for example, somebody qualifying under another route, which resolves their circumstances and therefore means that they no longer want to proceed with an asylum application.
Right, I understand that, all of which should be known to the Home Office, and presumably, therefore, the Home Office will have a record of the status of that person and where they are, and in particular, if they remain in the United Kingdom, therefore without permission to do so. So, by my calculations, you've just said that 54% of that 17,316 figure were down to Albanians. The government has had some success with returning Albanians, presumably has kept a record of which Albanians have been returned and obliged to leave the UK. So why did Mr Ridley say he does not know where those 17,316 people are?
That would be one for Mr. Thompson.
Well, because, Mr Lawson, they are not detained. And therefore, it's
you should be able to now
you either
hear
detain
it,
people and say they are therefore in place A, or they're not detained.
They just sorted their own
as Tom quite rightly said,
out.
Some are detained to facilitate removal, but that is for a very specific period of time. For those who are not detained, then of course you know their address, but you don't know precisely where they are. Mr Lawson, in as much as they are free to move around.
So well, except they're not, are they? Because what you do know is that they no longer have a live application for right to remain in the United Kingdom, and therefore, under our migration laws, will be obliged to leave the country. So whether they are detained because they may be seen as a greater risk or not detained, the government surely will want to keep a record of where that person may be, but particularly whether that person is still in the UK or not. When that person leaves the UK, hopefully Border Force doing its job will be able to effectively tick them off the list. What I think the committee wanted to know, which Mr Ridley wasn't able to answer, is of those who haven't been ticked off the list because they're accounted for because they've left, and the others are therefore in the UK illegally, why don't we know roughly where they are, or what enforcement action is being taken to make sure that after a certain space of time they have left as they should have done?
Yes, I think all of those are
they haven't got a clue
and you are absolutely
where they are.
Right. But if you're not detained, it would be wrong of me to say, therefore, I can pinpoint to a precise square metre where each individual is. And I don't think that's what I'm asking. I don't think that is what you're asking. I'm grateful for that clarification. But you're right. There are processes that are gone through, and there are records that are kept. I can't give you a precise answer. Now.
What does the form look like? So on the basis that a large number of those people have physically signed a form which has physically come into the receipt of somebody in the Home Office, does that form say on it that you have to leave the country within X weeks or else, or that they have to report in every so often until they've left the country? Surely you're not just allowing somebody to sign a form saying, I no longer wish to continue with my application, and then there's no oversight of them at all, because all of them would do that because they're then completely off the radar. How are you checking that they have withdrawn their application and left the country because that's what they need to do?
From an operational point of view, Mr Hobbs can address that point, but I understand why you're asking the question.
Thank you, Minister. Mr Loughton, I think there's two things, and the Permanent Secretary's letter addresses that some of them were miscategorised. So some of those withdrawals will be because people have not complied with our processes and therefore have not substantiated their claim. You'll be aware that when people arrive, we screen them, we accommodate them. It is not uncommon that certain nationalities are then not.
We know that. We know you accommodate them. And
there are two categories within the withdrawal, which I think is drawn out.
We know all that, and all of that came out in our session with the Perm Secretary. And what I've just said is that by the Home Secretary's or the Home Office's own figures, in the last quarter, it was as many as 95% that came under that other category. Roughly what amount of that 95% has been miscategorised, do you estimate?
So I do not know. I don't have an estimate for those that are miscategorised, but there will be a proportion as we've gone through the legacy flow that will have not complied and not responded when we have invited them to interview or reached out to them via the streamlined asylum process or contacted their last known legal representative.
Right.
Many of the people will have legal representatives.
That classifies them as a non-substantiated claim, i.e. they've absented themselves from the
What
the
have I
system.
seen
They are
him on
difficult,
board?
more
Swifty,
difficult
you
to keep
said
track
you've
of.
seen that guy
Those
before.
who are not more
I've
difficult
seen him
to keep
before.
tracks
What has he
on
been
are
on?
the other category, who, as I've said, the main two reasons for that being they have signed a form and physically given it in, so they've had to.
That's what I mean. If they have an amnesty now,
or they have
everyone
left
that's
the country
here is
and
here.
that box is
That's we're
ticked.
fucked, and we
So
still have
how
them.
many roughly?
And we still
because you
take
should
them.
know.
So I don't
that
have that figure in
95%.
front of me, but I think there is a commitment to write to the committee setting out the classifications about that category. So those that we know have left the country, those that we know have got other forms of leave, and those who may no longer be in touch with us because very sadly they may have also passed away, because that can happen while people are in the process. And I think there is a commitment to write to the committee to break down
Okay, but
that
Mr.
number.
Pass
I
away.
know that somebody who's
The guy
died
on
is
the
not
Bibby
going to sign a
Stockholm.
form and submit it to the Home Office.
No, sorry,
Maybe
they may have done, but then subsequently are no longer with us, and therefore that is why we're going through the process of data cleansing so that we can give the accurate answers to your breakdown. So some of those may have been.
Those people will be easier to trace because presumably there'll be a death certificate.
That is what we are going through the process of clarifying that data to give those answers.
The people you've defined within that other category
fucking
are people
brilliant.
who actually they are the easiest people to locate. We asked
The
2
death
weeks ago
certificate.
what is actually on the form. What do they actually sign up to? It'd be quite nice actually for us
If
to see the
people
form,
withdraw-
and we asked for that. We've not been sent one of those forms. What I want to know is what is the procedure when they've signed the form to follow up to make sure they have left the country in a reasonable amount of time.
There isn't.
Where individuals do not have
fucking
leave, and
isn't.
the individual, if they don't have any other form of leave or right to be in the UK, will be informed of that at the point at which they withdraw their claim. The same as if someone has their claim refused.
I thought that was hilarious.
If they withdraw their claim and don't
Easier
have
to
any
track
other
that,
basis
surely,
to remain
but
in
they'll
the
have a
case,
death
they will be
certificate.
informed that they have no basis and should leave. They may also be subject to immigration bail and reporting requirements, which they do through our immigration enforcement centres, and they are required to regularly report. All of those individuals will also flow into immigration enforcement, who will action those
wouldn't let
cases.
somebody
and
who's
that
out on
action will
bail,
be
you
dependent
know,
on the risk matrix.
they have
and
like
work
tags,
on
don't they?
various different
Curfews,
criteria,
tags.
such as the harm that individual may cause. So particularly if they're a former foreign national offender, if there are vulnerabilities with
You
that
don't know
individual,
if
but
they're
also
foreign
dependent on their
national
nationality
offenders
and the
because-
ability to return those
There
individuals
goes my
to that country in the
documentation.
documentation process. So there'll be a whole range of criteria about
So
how those are then actioned.
final question, because Mr. Ridley didn't know where any of the 17,316 were. Roughly how many do you think you know where they are?
I don't know that data. As I said, we
you
are
don't
in
know.
the process
They
of
don't know where they
clarifying that
are.
data and writing to the committee
They
to set
haven't
out
got
what
a
we
figure,
do know
'cause
about
they don't know how
that
many's fucking missing.
17,000 number that you have asked about.
I don't understand, Madam Chairman, how you can come to this committee for a second time
And not have the
having asked
data.
a question 2 weeks ago
And not have the
still
data.
not have the information. I'm sorry.
Well, I think, yes, well, I agree with you on that, yes.
Yeah, you've got no excuse.
I'm going to go back to another issue on this letter, and let's hope we can get a bit more information. So it's the paragraph 2, which is about the number of people who've been refused asylum and sent back to their country.
This
Now,
would
I think
be
this
good.
was specifically,
This
we were
would be a
interested
good
in
number.
the small boats issue
Yeah.
and about the number of people who'd been returned. So on the second page of that letter is a table going back to 2020, and it gives us the total figure of. So these are people who have
Andy
been
Red
returned,
Warburg,
who have
yeah,
come across
you're
in
right.
small
I had
boats
one the other night.
since
the Deliveroo.
2020, and I've calculated
It was supposed to be
that
Linda,
figure
but
of
it was
people who've
more like
arrived in the
fucking
United
Luke.
Kingdom by
And he
small
didn't
boats
speak
is
English.
109,917. And what this is telling us is that the total number of people who have been removed since 2020 is 408.
Fuck
Now that, as my
off.
calculation, I hope this is correct, is 0.004%
Of the
small
total number.
boats
Yeah.
have been returned.
Wow.
Would either of the
400.
ministers like to comment on that?
No, that's not a number I recognise. I can see the table and the chart that you've got on page 2, just above paragraph 3.
Yeah, it's at the top of the chart. It says since 2020 there have been 408 returns of non-Albanians, non-foreign national offenders, small boat arrivals.
Wow.
So that's from the Permanent Secretary of the Home Office. I appreciate, Minister, you've only been in post for a very short period of time, but this is the most
That's
senior
no
official in
excuse,
the Home
because
Office
those are the numbers that when you go into
the
post,
committee,
these are the numbers you
408
want straight away,
people
and these
have
are the
been returned.
reason, and you want to be answered
May
why
I tackle it this way?
these people have only just
because
been
I
sent
don't
back
have
400,
a substantive answer
you know,
on that specific point.
0.004%
I recognise that this committee has asked some very serious and detailed questions
You're the minister,
of the data.
you're the one where the head bucks.
Mr.
You
Longo's
need to
very
fucking sort it out.
reasonable point that these questions were asked 2 weeks ago. The letter is dated yesterday's date, it's the 12th of December, with this detail on. Respectfully, I have always dealt constructively with colleagues, I hope, and with the previous select committees that I've been grilled by, notably the Justice Select Committee, the House of Lords Constitution Committee, etc. And I want to continue that constructive relationship with this committee. Well, just let me finish. That's very encouraging. And what might be helpful is that if there are specific questions on the data that you want to put to witnesses in the detail that you are perfectly reasonably asking, then either setting out in slightly more detail those questions, and I'll endeavour to get it. And can I just commit to one point, because Mr. Lawson raised a very important point about a form that was requested by the committee and a commitment that was given to the committee.
If you
to provide
average,
that form,
let's just average, right, say 25,000 a year, just a conservative estimate, because we know some years more, some years less.
And the interim second Permanent
that's a lot of
Secretary
people since 2020.
It was a disaster.
I
would have
understand that's what you're saying.
expected that the Permanent Secretary and the interim second Permanent Secretary would have written to me straight away with all the information that I'd requested and colleagues had requested at that meeting. Silence. Therefore, I wrote on the 7th of December requesting all the information that had been put to the Permanent Secretary and his colleague at the meeting. We finally got something last night, this letter in front of us with this information on, which I take a concern that I have to write to get information out of the Permanent Secretary, first of all. Secondly, this committee always wants to have a constructive relationship with ministers.
You need to know answers.
But we expect ministers to come before this committee properly briefed.
Yep.
You have a whole array of civil servants sitting behind you. They've all got the ability to pass you a note, just as happens in the Commons, and I saw happen yesterday. So I appreciate you're very new in post. I appreciate that. But equally, this committee
you should have took the balls by the horns and fucking rode it like a man.
Of the way that the Home Office is treating members of Parliament and not providing information in a timely way. I'm going to bring Lee Anderson in this point.
Who cares about what members of the Parliament think? It's members of the public that are ultimately that want fucking answers to this. I don't care that he didn't bring the shit to Parliament in time. It's to the public.
I saw a little bit of that on display yesterday as well. But respectfully, if there are going to be detailed and specific points that are going to be asked and so forth, and I understand your point about the letter of the 7th of December, and I saw that, and I understand and share your frustration in terms of the response to that. But please do forgive me for dwelling on the point. I want to be constructive, and I want to engage with this committee constructively and be as helpful as I can to you and your colleagues.
I'm very glad to hear that, Minister, but asking for questions about how many people have been returned who've arrived in small boats is not the kind of thing that I would expect to have to give notice of to the Home
you
Office.
Should be able to go,
if you come
boom,
before a committee,
that's how many.
I'm going to ask you those questions. We all know this is a really topical issue. We're all concerned about it. We all want to know. So I think that my clerks give a full explanation of what the committee is likely to want to discuss when we have ministers in front of us. I don't think you need to have the specific question of exactly what we're going to ask, because you're grown-ups, you're politicians, you've been around, you know what the issues are. Lee Anderson.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I'd like to welcome the ministers to their new roles. But I'm not going to hold back, ministers, and welcome Mr. Hobbs. Now, look, we sat here.
He never does, Lee
a couple of weeks
Anderson.
back with the permanent Home Secretary and his assistant, and the Chair's quite right. They were evasive and almost slippery in their replies to this committee, disrespectful to this committee.
He's good. He don't
take
no
with
shit.
no figures.
He hasn't for out
Now, I
all
think
this.
it's a little bit disrespectful, Dan, Mr. Hobbs, that you must have actually watched that meeting.
But I trust no politician.
And you saw the questions that were asked, and you're being asked the same questions now, and you still don't have the answers. I think that's disrespectful.
Yeah.
But I'll go to the ministers first. The Mr. Rycroft and Mr. Ridley, who, to my knowledge, didn't answer one single question throughout the whole session. Now, I want to know, ministers, have they been spoken to by the ministerial team? If they have, what conversations have you had? And do you think it would be a good idea to put these pair into special measures?
Yeah.
Mr. Anderson, let me address that, and I know you're not going to hold back. You don't, and nor should you, because you're entitled to ask your questions in your own way, and it is a unique and very effective style, if I may say so. In response to the questions that you asked,
no, it's
there
a
was a follow-up
style.
letter and there was a response
Whoever's
that
in
was received
Parliament,
last night.
whoever's
Yes,
an
I saw there was
MP should
further
have.
joint
They
committee,
shouldn't
which Dame
be
Diana referred
afraid
to in the Chamber of the
to
House
ask
of
questions
Commons
outside
yesterday
the
as well.
narrative.
There was a further follow-up to that, and yes, I have seen that, and I have seen the response, and you heard my response to Dame Diana. My view and the way I've always conducted myself is to be professional, to be prepared for meetings, for colleagues, to be respectful to colleagues. But I do caveat that with, from time to time, there will be very specific questions that are asked, whether of officials or whether of ministers, and I'm not going to sit here and say I've got an answer when I don't, respectfully, Mr. Anderson, whether to you or to anyone else. I agree with you. If you ask questions 2 weeks ago to which you have not had a satisfactory answer, then I'll make sure that does not happen again.
Okay, do you think it may be a good idea? Because if I was in the Home Office, and thank goodness I'm not, but if I was working on this, there would be a weekly total. Or a monthly total.
Nice one, Paul. I like that.
No, exactly what's going on. Would that be a good idea?
My instinctive reaction is yes.
Thank you. So I want to talk now, ministers, please, about the huge progress that's being made with the legacy backlog. Now, we've seen the huge progress, and that's great news. But what does it actually achieve? Because all we see the high numbers, 60, 70% of claims being accepted. They're then moved out of the hotels, which is great. But then they're moved out into the community to settle. They're taking housing, social housing.
And how many percentage of council housing is taken up by non-British people? Could somebody put me a percentage? That was announced the day before yesterday.
What I would say, Mr. Anderson, if I may, is that the Prime Minister has been very clear about the commitments that we have made and the need for us to deliver on them, and one of them was to deal with the legacy backlog, and I think it's fair to say that from across Parliament there have been very strong views expressed about the need to do that, including from members of this committee. We are making the progress that we want to make in relation to it, and I think that ending, for example, reliance on the accommodation estate is the right thing to do. I have had, and I recall from my previous time in the department, just how strongly colleagues
I think
felt
it was
about the
50
need
some
to
odd
vacate
percent
hotels within their communities.
Swift.
We are getting
I
on
think
and
you're
will
right on
deliver
that. I think
the
there was a bit
departure
more
from
than
the first
50%.
50 hotels by the end
Rotten
of January.
politics did it.
I want to
I
then
think.
get on and make additional announcements about further progress in relation to that in the months ahead. I think that that is something that people will welcome. The fact is we are spending £8 million a day in the asylum system presently. That is
Fucking
not
£8 million quid a day.
situation. I do think that it's right that where we can provide clarity to people about their specific cases, that is what we should do. That is what the getting down of the legacy backlog seeks to do. But all of that has to be seen in the wider context of what is being achieved by government. I think the fact that we have seen
being achieved by government.
percent reduction in those
what you're
arrivals
doing,
via small boats is sigtigant and important. Meets
you're
what
getting them out the
I
hotels,
think when you
yes,
consider the fact
but
that we've
then you're
seen a
putting the
90%
onus on
reduction in
local
arrivals from
authorities.
Albania
What then?
in this
Local
year,
authorities
again,
are going
that is
bankrupt
testament
now.
to
We
the
got
efforts that have
Birmingham
been
gone
made by
bankrupt.
successive
We
ministers
got Bristol
in
on the
these
verge
roles,
of fucking
important
collapse
changes. And so
or
I don't
bankruptcy.
think you can take the
And
areas of the
all
business
this is because of
that you've
the
touched on
stress
in
and
isolation.
strain
I think you have to look
of
at
the
this issue
migration
around. We're trying to
crisis and
move this forward in a
immigration.
pragmatic way
Cannot
that
put,
addresses these issues.
you know,
and that
they're taking it
fundamentally
off
gets
the
cost down
government's
because they're not
back
sustainable.
and putting it onto
Okay, so,
local
just a couple more,
authority,
please, Chair.
into
So
our
it was
communities.
me actually who asked the question.
Cannot
at the
cope
last,
with this.
Well, when Mr. Rycroft and Mr. Ridley was here, about
It's
how
all
many,
well and good, sat around these
small boat
tables.
arrivals
Oh
into
yeah, we're doing
refugees
great. We're doing great. You're
had
not.
actually been returned. Now,
You're
bear in mind what
sweeping
the
it
Chair
under
just said
someone
previously,
else's
over
carpet.
100,000 in the last couple of years of 2 or 3 years have arrived here. Look on the chart that which Mr. Ridley has supplied,
Yes.
and we see that the non-Albanian returns is 420 in the last.
Fuck all, is it?
2020. That's out of a rival figure of over 100,000.
Over
Now,
100,000
is
since
An
2020.
acceptable figure, because like
400.
the Chair says, that's probably 0.0 something percent of arrivals.
Mr. Anderson, I want to see those figures as high as possible. I'm reading the same chart, and as far as I'm concerned, the numbers need to be significantly higher than that.
Significantly
And
higher.
one final question, please.
Okay,
Do
now-
you think that if we add an ID system, ID cards in this country,
No. Here we go.
migration?
Here we go.
As a principal,
Everyone has
I am
ID
anxious
cards.
about that, and my instinctive reaction is one of caution. We've had these debates in Parliament over many decades. There are many strongly held views on both sides of the argument. We're not traditionally a papers please type society.
Yes.
So you'll understand my instinctive caution in response to that specific suggestion.
Of course, it's also just worth adding that in terms of the facilitation of people into this country, we're dealing with complex criminality. Small boat arrivals, by the very nature of things, would not have an ID card amongst their possessions. In fact, what we often see is quite the opposite, with documents being dumped over the side of...
Oh, here we go. Here we go. This is it, isn't it? ID cards.
Difficult for the authorities on this side in terms of being able to manage that issue.
Yeah, because they can say,
Chair.
I Joe
Just in
Blocks,
terms of a constructive
and I come from
relationship with this
Syria,
committee and the
but I
House,
really
can I
come
just
from
say
Albania.
to, Minister
There you go,
Pursglove,
innit?
We've just been
New
sent
identity
reporting
there and then,
from you,
Eagles.
Minister,
Brand
about
new
the
identities.
annual review of
You know,
the
'cause you
financial
can't prove who
allowances
they
sent
are.
to asylum
You want a
seekers
new
and
identity
failed
free of
asylum
charge,
seekers
come to
supported under
fucking
sections
UK.
95 and 4 of the Immigration and Asylum Act 1999. It would have been much more helpful to have had that in advance of the session. Sending it when we've already started is really not helping that build that constructive relationship.
I think, Dame Diana, that colleagues generally would accept that I'm always constructive, that I always seek to do my very best to aid the House. I would like to consider myself to be a parliamentarian. You'll appreciate that this has been a very busy week for ministers, and we are grappling with various challenges, and we are trying to be as available to the House as possible, speaking to a lot of colleagues, and I take your feedback on board, and I will always try
See,
to
they get the
provide
ID
timely
cards in because
correspondence
they
to
use the
committee to try and
immigration
aid all
problem.
deliberations.
They'll
I
admit
think that
eventually
most
that
members
they've
of this
lost
committee
full
would vouch
control.
for the fact
They
that
don't know how
that
many
is the way
people's
that I
in
go
the
about my
fucking
business.
country.
Thank you for
But if
that
they introduce an
undertaking. I
ID
think
card
thus far
system
we
on
found it very
everybody, we then
difficult to
get
have
to know
that
what
timely,
we'll have more control
information sent to us.
for the
So
greater
that's
good.
that's the way we're going to go forward. That's very helpful and useful to know. Marco Longhi.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. And knowing the two ministers as I do, particularly Mr. Tomlinson, who used to be my whip, I know that
My
there
whipping
are,
boy, my bitch.
people with whom I would certainly want to work with in a very constructive way, because I know their personalities and their own personal integrity in this. Nonetheless, they fill the roles they fill. And in doing the job they do, they have to be supported by civil servants, officers, for want of a better word, to support them in the job they do, as does the Prime Minister. Now, the Prime Minister on the 7th of December made it known that this year we have returned 5,000 people who are Albanians and cut those arrivals by 90%. I would like to know where he gets that information from and how confident he can be in that information, because
He
when the
got it
Permanent
off of the
Secretary
back of a crisp
puts
packet.
forward a document to this committee that says, and if you look at column 3, Albanian returns total since 2020, 762.
Whoa.
Unless I'm reading this data incorrectly, something is wrong somewhere, isn't
Yep.
it?
Fucking drastically wrong.
Mr. Longo, may I just pick up the first point that you make? And I agree with you. I'm bound to say that in my first 3 full parliamentary days in this role, I have been briefed exceptionally well, and I've been supported by the officials, not just those who sit
You
behind
didn't
me, but
have
a
the
wider
numbers
team
of
as well.
returns,
But I do take
so
on
you
board, and I
wasn't
agree with you.
briefed
And I
that
agree with the
well, were
thrust
you?
Of your point. I can see the column that you are looking to. The number that I have in front of me is 5,100 since the 13th of December 2022, and that's the number that I have in front of me.
I call bullshit on that number.
You briefed on this
Bullshit.
paper then?
Bullshit.
If I may, I can explain the difference. So this relates to just those Albanians who will have come in small boats. We will have returned Albanians who will have either come through other routes into the UK, irregularly or clandestinely, Albanians who are here who came lawfully but then overstayed, or Albanians who were foreign national offenders. So when the Prime Minister is talking about the increase of removals to Albania, he is talking about the total
number of
people
Albanians.
that we have returned to
See,
Albania
they're
under our
mixing the
agreement, which is
figures.
5,000.
We want to
I'm
know
sorry, I have to
solely
disagree,
little
because
boats
on
that's
the
coming in
government website in
illegally,
front of me,
not people that's come
a
in
quote
legally but
from the Prime
overstayed.
Minister
That's
that
different.
says, last year, a third of all those arriving in small boats
Correct.
were Albanian.
Yeah.
This year we have returned 5,000 people and cut those arrivals by 90%.
Yeah. That would lead
And
to me to
Albanian
believe that
arrivals
it was
have
people
far
in
more
small
recourse to
boats.
courts than anyone under this new legislation. That's why I'm so confident that this bill will work. I don't understand your explanation.
They are
He's
different things.
bullshitting the
if I may.
figures.
So the Prime Minister's statement
Absolutely.
is correct. We
Bullshitted
have
the
returned
figures.
more than 5,000 people.
Yeah,
to Albania.
total numbers.
The
That's
stats
people that's
on those
overstayed that's
arriving
come
in
in
small boats has
legally.
also cut by
What about-
90%.
No, you're
But they are
bullshitting.
different subsets
Bullshit.
of data.
Bullshit.
Of the 5,000
bullshit.
people, what proportion had
We're
arrived
small
in
boats.
then?
So it will be the number of 762 but that's since 2020. So our returns in 2023 of Albanian small boat arrivals, and they may have arrived in a different period because if people have asylum claims or other claims, their removal and their arrival may not be in the same reporting period. To June 2023, January to June 2023, it's the 531 Albanian returns in small boats.
So how many Albanians arrived since 2020 then? Total number of Albanians arrived since 2020?
5,000 people.
Yes, we have returned 5,000 people.
In
The
total?
chart in the Permanent Secretary's letter, it only relates to those who have arrived on small boat. The Prime Minister's is all Albanian removals who have no lawful right to be in the United Kingdom.
So what
So
you've
the
done
Prime
is,
Minister is
you've
mixing
done, oh, that looks
information.
good, we'll stick that with that.
The Prime Minister was setting the data, which
Yeah,
is correct.
you
We've done
bunch of
more than 5,000 removals to to Albania this year, and the numbers of small boat crossings from Albanians has been cut by 90%.
Mr. Longo,
Yeah,
may I
90%
just say that I agree
total.
and understand the thrust of your question, but the number that I do have, the overall number, is 5,100, and that is as of the 30th of November this year. So between the 13th of December 2022
Yeah.
up to the 30th of November 2023,
Yeah.
5,100.
Yeah, and that's people that came in legally, overstayed.
One more question.
But how many people came in on a boat?
Ministers. That 5,100, so therefore that's not just made up of small boat arrivals.
Yeah,
That
it's
could be
made up of
Albanians
yeah.
in this country for donkey's years.
Yeah, that's right.
Or
Exactly.
who have arrived by different means, yes.
Yeah,
Who've been in prison. I think there's a large number who've been
in prison.
Or national offenders, yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
who we would know where they are. We can transport them easily.
yeah, exactly.
Yes.
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 Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
But
she's
just to go back
good.
to what the Permanent Secretary says, excluding the Albanians, only 408 returns since 2020 of the small boats.
Yeah,
That
Small
was
boats,
the,
yes.
That
That's-
was the
408.
focus of
That is
Lee Anderson's
Yes,
question.
I agree, and that's exactly
Wow.
what the chart says. Thank you.
Right, okay. I'm going to come to James Daly in one moment, but I just wanted to refer to question 4 in the letter, which is at the bottom of the second page. This is about Bibby Stockholm. We asked for the costings around Bibby Stockholm, the per person cost. In this, it says that the value of the vessel accommodation services portion is 22,450,772. I think that's the first time that we've heard that figure in terms of the cost of the, I'm assuming, the Bibby Stockholm and any other barges that the government are contracting with. Could the minister...
that is the only barge with which
so
there is a contractual
22 million for the Bibby Stockholm. And how long is that for? What's the period of that contract?
I do not have that length of contract to hand, but I think what we have committed to doing is to provide details in the new year around the...
is that 22 million with conversion as well?
Through the prism and with the context that you are seeking.
The thing that just strikes me as very strange is that in the letter it says the value for money assessment is currently being updated to give the latest per person per night cost, and we will provide details in the new year, as you say. I am just flabbergasted that a value for money assessment was not carried out at the time that the contract was let. Do you not understand why the committee's concerned about that?
The word updated is in that statement.
But that's
Madam
because...
Chair. And I think it is. I think you will appreciate why it is important that we do revise those value for money estimates as time passes, for the simple reason that we want to be responsive to needs. And if we need to, for example, put additional provision in place, if the number of people on board changes and various other variables come into play, we need to be able to adapt those figures to make sure that what we're dealing with, and actually when we're engaging with committees like yours and with Parliament and society more generally, we are talking in an accurate sense. And so you'll understand why that's quite important.
You know, absolutely. But it says here this contract was varied in April 2023 to incorporate vessel accommodation services on the Bibby Stockholm barge at Portland Port. So I would have thought when you were varying the original contract that value for money assessment would have been done at that point. Are you saying it wasn't?
I would assume, and again, I've only been in this role since Thursday last week, that work such as that was carried out at the time. But again, I make the point that in this statement, in this letter from the Permanent Secretary, it is talking about updating those costing figures.
You couldn't tell us what the value for money was at the time, because they must have done an assessment about the cost of a hotel compared to putting someone onto the Bibby Stockholm. There must have been some assessment. I mean, perhaps Mr. Hobbs.
Well, there is undoubtedly. This is undoubtedly a more cost-effective way of providing accommodation, as the large accommodation sites at Wethersfield.
How do we know?
And as we propose at Scampton would be the case. But again, you're asking for figures. What we have committed to do is to do this work and to come back to the committee with those revised costings, taking full account of the most up-to-date circumstances. And I think it is important that we engage with you in an accurate sense, and this will allow us to do that.
Okay, but what I'm saying to you is I'm surprised you didn't do the value for money assessment at the time that the Bibby Stockholm came online. That's what I'm saying to you. You may well be updating it now if you're increasing the numbers who will be on the Bibby Stockholm. I understand that. But at the time of the contract being amended, I would have thought you would be able to give me the figure to say the value for money was X. So if you haven't got it, I don't know if Mr. Hobbs can help us on this.
Don't have that figure.
No, Mr. Hobbs hasn't got it either. Okay, James Daly.
Thank you very much, Chair. Minister Tomlinson, can I just ask you to confirm for the record what Rule 39 interim measures are?
Yes, Rule 39 interim measures are rulings from a Strasbourg court where, pending a final hearing in Strasbourg, a judgment is made by a court as to whether an action should or shouldn't happen. It's an interim measure. It's an interim before you get to a final hearing.
Essentially injuncting a course of action whilst the legal proceedings go on.
Before you get to the final hearing, exactly right.
Now, in terms of the legislation that was voted on and before Parliament yesterday, does that incorporate effectively Section 55 of the Illegal Migration Act 2023? That section is not yet in force, but that Section 55 provides that the Act effectively provides that a minister can choose whether or not to comply with interim measures in respect to the removal of an individual under that Act.
Mr. Daly, yes, it does. It refers specifically to that section, Section 55 of that Act, in Clause 5, Subclause A of the bill.
So does that mean in straightforward terms that if an individual takes a legal course of action, that ministers, if they so choose, can simply ignore that? The injunction, they could, if it is felt appropriate and it's the correct thing to do.
It's too much of a money-making exercise, because you've got to remember
both in the illegal
the
Migration
government's
Act
last
and
grid
in the
was
Safety of Rwanda
lockdown, wasn't
Asylum
it?
and
Now the
Immigration
next
Bill,
big money-making,
what it does is
because
exactly
lots
as
of
you
people
say,
are
it makes it
making money
abundantly
from
clear
this.
that it is for a minister of the
You know,
Crown,
how
and
many
only
hotel
for a minister of the Crown
owners
to make a decision
were
as to
given
whether the United Kingdom is
contracts
going to
on the
comply
backhanders
with
and shit
an
like
interim
that, like
measure.
the
So
PPE?
yes, you're
Would
absolutely right.
you
Just
agree
saying.
that position, which is a clear statutory position that you set out, is necessary because at this moment in time the government's internal legal advice and the general legal position is that interim measures are binding on state parties and that failing to comply with them amounts to a violation of the convention?
I think you're referring to the government's legal position statement, not legal advice. You know, as my role as a former law officer, that I don't discuss official legal advice, but I do discuss and will discuss the government's legal position statement that has been published, I think, the day before yesterday, which you're referring to. Yes, of course, as a country we abide by our international obligations. That is absolutely right. Actually, the legislation, in my view, is drafted in such a way, the test, the serious and irreversible harm test, that is set out in Clause 4 is language that mirrors the Strasbourg court test in terms of whether an interim order is going to be made or not. My personal view is that test is a very high one. That test is going to be have to be pretty rigorously gone through, and that actually we will comply with our international obligations. Of course we will. But what that sets out, another way of saying it, that sets out the orthodox constitutional position, because it is governments that make treaties, it is Parliament that makes laws for our country.
I don't want to turn this into two lawyers talking to each other about legal concepts, but can I?
I love lawyers talking to each other.
Expensive.
Yeah, but can I just ask? I'm sorry, Mr. Tomlinson. Just so we're absolutely 100% clear in respect of this. If the current Rwanda legislation was to pass through Parliament, forgetting the legal tests about what the Higher Court Tribunal or anything else like that, is it the government position that interim Rule 39 interim measures, if such an order is made by a European court, a government minister can ignore those?
And the Prime Minister has been very, very clear, crystal clear, that he will do whatever it takes to ensure that the flights take off. That is the first thing. The second thing is the legislation, as you say, makes it abundantly clear that it won't be for a domestic court, it will be for a Minister of the Crown to decide what happens in those eventualities. And can I just say that in my role as a law officer, I've been dealing with cases on a daily, sometimes on an hourly basis, and the way that they're dealt with, as you know, with your legal training and your legal background, they're dealt with on the evidence, they're dealt with on the facts, and they're dealt with by rigorous scrutiny, and you'd expect nothing less from government ministers.
So can I just press you in my final few questions regarding the concern that was raised, I think, in the House yesterday about, I'll call it vexatious litigation, but the fact that there are spurious claims that are made to justify appeals and judicial review and all these types of things. Now, in terms of answering that point, in terms of the Rwanda legislation that is going through Parliament not being held up for anything, months if not years by these types of claims, what's your answer to that?
It's an incredibly important question, and we of course will go through the legislation line by line when we get to the committee stage. But you will have seen Clause 4, you'll have seen the way that it's been drafted. One would have to produce compelling evidence. It's not just on a mere assertion, it's not just on a spurious
if
claim.
the planes were ever going to take off,
evidence
they would take
relating
off. They
to
wouldn't
a
tell us
person's
about it. They
particular,
don't need our
individual
permission.
circumstances.
That's
So
why
I can't
we
just
vote
make a
these
bold
people
assertion. I
in,
can't just say
is
that
to
something
do
is
on
the case.
our
I will have
behalf
to produce
the
evidence.
good.
Not
So
only
just
will
let
I
the
have to
planes
just
take
produce
off,
evidence,
but the
it will have
consultation,
to be
shite.
compelling evidence. And then if that is to be a suspensive claim, if that is to stop me getting on the plane to Rwanda, I will then have to fulfil the test that I face a real, imminent and foreseeable risk of serious and irreversible harm. Those are very high tests indeed.
just final few points. Would you be able to confirm to us, I don't know whether you can confirm now or later, the time frame upon which applications to the upper tribunal to the immigration judge is the first judicial point of contact? How long would a applicant have to make that from being
under the Illegal Migration Act? The aim is within 28 days the vast majority of cases will have been gone through.
Okay. In terms of the 28 days,
you just say 28
there are two
days
options open. You're either successful. So if your argument on what you've said happens, what's the next legal step for those people? Or is that case within 28 days your asylum status is granted?
Well, it depends what happens. If it's described as manifestly unfounded or completely unfounded, if that is the case, if that is the decision that is made, then that's the decision that's made. Are you asking what happens? What is the next process?
So what I'm trying to say is it the case that what you foresee in terms of litigation? It's an important point we've raised numerous times.
It is.
That within 28 days, most cases will be dealt with by the upper tribunal, one way or the other.
That will be absolutely concluded. Mr. Daly, what I'm not telling you is that there won't be claims, because of course we anticipate that there will be claims.
I'm just talking about the time frame for them when
Correct, and 28 days under the Illegal Migration Act.
I was reading a case called Oceana, which is a higher court case regarding so one of the great delay in these proceedings is often judicial review proceedings. Now, Oceana seems to be suggesting that it is very difficult for judicial review proceedings to proceed for cases that have been turned down. Am I right in respect to that?
You're absolutely right. Oceana is a very important case. It's a case where the committee will be very interested to know the court agreed and followed the very clear wording of the statute and said where the statute is set out clearly, even if it's an ouster clause, a notwithstanding clause, if you like, where it is set out clearly, the court will and must follow it. That is the constitutional position, that is the parliamentary position, and that is why the Prime Minister has been so clear that this is the toughest piece of legislation that has ever been brought before Parliament.
When would for the 28-day period that we talked about for legal proceedings to be brought, if somebody's come off a small boat across the channel, where would they be held, or where would they be
in a hotel?
28-day period.
In a hotel.
That depends, and it depends on the circumstances. When the scheme is up and running, the aim and the intention is for the detention and the removal to be as swift as possible.
So it is the aim of the legislation for detention to be running. Well, say detention. We say detention.
When the scheme's up and running.
Detention to run over that 28-day period, in that they will be in some form of Home Office accommodation during the period of that 28 days.
At the moment, the Illegal Migration Act is not in force. When the scheme is up and running, when the Act is in force, then the aim is for there to be swift detention and swift removal.
Thank you, Chair.
May I come in on one of the
yes,
points
Marco,
that was made?
and then Alison Thewlis.
Oh, I'm sorry. On the point of allowing individual claims and the point of compelling evidence being provided, I understand why the point is being made that people need to be allowed to be making a claim. I get
I
that.
agree with you that, Swift.
They
should be questioned by criminal lawyers under oath.
Once there is a successful...
Because they're not under oath, so they can lie and through their fucking teeth now, and it won't make a blind bit of difference.
So difficult. What is to stop some of these clever lawyers from finding a way of replicating this many thousands of times and thus clogging up the system, the courts, the whole removal process?
Mr. Longy, I understand your question and I share your concern. What is to stop it is that the legislation does two things. It makes sure there is a systemic statement that Rwanda is safe. That is the first thing. So no claim can be brought at all. To Mr. Daly's point, the courts will have to follow the judgment of Parliament, if indeed it is the judgment of Parliament, that Rwanda will not refool, which is the technical term. People will not be removed to an unsafe third country. So Rwanda is deemed to be a safe country. So no claim can be brought under that ground whatsoever. only under your individual personal circumstances will you then be able to bring your claim. And to your point, it would be a spurious claim if someone were to assert that they had exactly the same individual characteristics, exactly the same features as another claimant. And so to try and copy it, which I think is the thrust of your question, there would need to be compelling evidence. You can't just assert that something is the case. There will need to be compelling evidence that will need to be brought.
If I may just
please,
try and come back on this, because I'm trying to understand this. In a sense, this is what a lot of asylum seekers do right now. They have charities over in Calais that brief them on exactly what to say, what documents to fill in, and why isn't there a judgment now that a lot of these are in fact spurious claims? Why are we not doing what other countries are doing, who do seem to think that it's spurious, like countries like Germany and other places have zero acceptance of Albanians into their country, or near 0% as it can be, but we've seen Q3 67%. That's the bit I don't understand.
When an application is made, there is a process and a determination, and part of that determination, if the evidence simply isn't there, then that's when the case, for example, could be deemed to be manifestly unfounded. That is part of the process. You can't just assert it, Mr. Long. There'll have to be evidence that will be brought as well, and not just any old evidence. It'll have to be compelling evidence.
If I may as well, our Albanian grant rate for men is something like 2%. Under asylum for Albanians, to your point about Germany.
And what is it for women?
I can't recall that off the top of my head. It's slightly higher, but there are far fewer. It's higher, but there are far fewer women. But I think it was published in our most recent statistics was the grant rate for men from Albania.
Okay, thank you. Alison Thewlis.
Thank you very much. If I could just start by asking how many of the children that went missing from Home Office hotel accommodation are still missing?
So what I can say is that there are no children in hotel accommodation now. There are no UASCs in hotels. 6 of the 7 hotels that we had for these purposes have been closed, and we have one that is available on standby in order to ensure that there is provision available in the eventuality of exceptional circumstances. What I can say in terms of the figures is that there are 132 children still missing at this stage.
132 out of the 154 that went missing are still missing.
Mr. Hobbs, do you want to give a...
Yeah, so just to clarify that figure, 103 of those are now adults against their claim.
You don't know where they are?
So 103 of the 132 that are now adults are still missing. 29 of the under 18s are still missing.
What are you doing to find them?
So we are working intensively with the local authority. We of course comply with the statutory framework that kicks in when issues like this arise, and of course we engage with the police under the protocol to make sure that we try and identify and find any missing young person as quickly as possible.
You're not doing a very good job of it if 132 out of 154 are still missing. That's been since June.
And there is that missing persons protocol.
You don't care,
so
do you?
I think that is a pretty outrageous suggestion, Madam
on
Chairman.
this point,
Suggest that members of this
point,
House and that government ministers don't care about that issue. I think is a pretty shocking.
If it was one of my children that had gone missing, I would want to know where they are more than 6 months down the line. 132 of them, you still don't know where they are. Now, we heard on a visit recently from an official in Belgium that when a child goes missing from their accommodation, they put in a huge amount of effort to find those children. Why are you not doing the same?
I would argue that very significant, and I really do resent actually any suggestion that any minister or any official doesn't care
or any politician
about
Minister,
any
could I
child
just stop you there? Because when we raised this with the Permanent Secretary 2 weeks ago, he didn't even have the figures. So we're grateful you've got the figures today, but it didn't inspire confidence in us 2 weeks ago that he couldn't even tell us how many children were
You will
missing.
appreciate there was a very clear claim there that I don't care about
That's
this,
right.
and I just want the record to be very clear that I do care enormously about
We're
this.
very
as I
pleased
think
to hear
any
that.
responsible minister or official in government would, and as I would argue any member of Parliament would equally well too. As I say, we continue to work very closely with the local authority, with the police, to try and identify children where they are missing, invoking those protocols. There is strenuous work going on as well, particularly working with the National Police Chiefs Council and the NCA to set out national guidance to try and aid that process as well, because we obviously want there to be best practice available to try and assist in that endeavour. We will continue to do everything within our power to aid that work as a Home Office to identify and find children that do go missing. I've provided the figures to the committee, and you can be absolutely assured, Ms Fulis, that this will continue to be a big priority for me in this role.
When will you have found all 132 of them?
I think you'll appreciate why I can't give you a definitive answer to that question, because there are variables involved, and those will depend very much on the circumstances of the individuals in question. But what I can absolutely say to you, again, and I repeat this point, that as a department we will do everything that we can, working with those agencies to identify and find those missing children.
The Children's Commissioner, Rachel de Souza, has expressed concerns about how much the Home Office actually cares about these children that are in accommodation. She said, I'm going to read out her quote, Mr Tomlinson.
Bye, Michael, mate. Have a good one.
Of the 5,298 children in the data return, the Home Office only provided vulnerability notes for 38% of the children. Do you believe that children that have fled, war zones, come to these shores alone, only 38% of them are actually vulnerable?
I have actually, in previous roles, always had a very good and constructive working relationship with the Children's Commissioner, and I intend for that to be the case in this role. I will want to see the Children's Commissioner, I will want to talk about this issue, I will want to hear her knowledge, expertise, feedback about what more she thinks that we can do to try and better the protections and the safeguards that we have in place to address this issue. I think it is worth reflecting on the fact that 88.6% of those children that are still missing are Albanian. We know
Does that mean
that
they
obviously
matter less?
So, look,
Why is that
I'm trying to
relevant?
unpack this issue, Ms Fulis. I'm really trying to explain the context to it as well, and the work that we're doing to try and address this. You will appreciate that very often links into serious criminality, and that is often the explanation for why these circumstances arise. Evil criminal gangs that are responsible for the trade across the channel often have a footprint in this way, trying to take advantage of vulnerable children. That's why I want to work with the Children's Commissioner and others to try and further the work that we do to try and improve performance in this regard. And candidly, I will very happily work constructively with any member of this House in that endeavour, and that includes you, and it includes any member of this committee that's got an interest in that issue, because I don't think there can be anything less serious than trying to make sure that children are properly safeguarded and kept safe.
There's a risk of those children, as you say,
So
being
serious.
trafficked into into circumstances which make them even more vulnerable than they already are. The recent report that this committee has produced, the evidence that we received suggested very strongly that the Home Office was no longer treating trafficking as a priority. The policy was there, but in implementation it was not there. Why is that?
My understanding is that this is a priority for officials as it is for government ministers. I consider this issue to be of utmost seriousness.
People arriving under the Illegal Migration Act will no longer be assessed for trafficking. How will you find their vulnerability if you're not going to assess their claims?
We will always, I'm sure, and I'll perhaps bring Mr Hobbs in for an operational view on this, but we will always screen individuals properly and identify vulnerabilities and ensure that those issues are properly addressed and catered for. But I don't know if there's...
No, the Minister's right. Just to clarify, under the Legal Migration Act, what it did provide for is that if someone was found to have reasonable grounds, that under the public order exemption, that they could be precluded from the 30-day rest and recovery period. It did not prevent the assessment of people of trafficking, and that their ongoing needs could be met in Rwanda. So that's the process under the Legal Migration Act, is the public order exemption.
People working in this sector have told me, because some of them are based in my constituency, that due to the provisions in the Legal Migration Act and also in what the legislation this week in Rwanda, is that people are going to be far, far less likely to engage with anybody in officialdom because they believe they'll be sent to Rwanda. Do you accept that that is the risk of your policy?
In terms of minors, no, because unaccompanied children are not part of the Rwanda scheme. Full stop.
Well, they're part of the treaty, because there's provisions in there that say if children to end up in Rwanda in some way or another, they'll be dealt with in XYZ way. So
not with respect, not for unaccompanied children. No.
The treaty says.
It is expressly what the treaty says. If you just give me 1 minute.
The treaty says that they won't be sent, and then it has a whole lot of provisions for what happens when if they are found there.
I might add,
so that suggests there will be some age-disputed cases.
In all fairness,
previous time,
I don't believe any of them's been trafficked here. Fucking hell.
Thank you. It's Article 3, Clause 4.
Where's there provision? We can go into this at another time. I don't want to fall down a particular rabbit hole with this, but there are provisions in there for what happens if children end up in Rwanda by accident. Can I say that I have a huge amount of
traffic here maybe to destabilise the country, because you know they've destabilised other countries, haven't they?
Both of you at some point.
You're very welcome to work
just
through
saying.
Issues with me and the team.
A lot of the casework that I see is low-level incompetence in the Home Office as a department. So biometric residence permits with the wrong name, the wrong date of birth, the wrong place of birth, rendering those documents invalid. What pressure are you putting on the service to ensure that things are issued correctly?
Accuracy is always something that I feel very strongly about. In a number of ministerial roles, that has been an area of focus for me. I could not be clearer that we need to get more decisions right first time. I think that actually the work that has gone on over the course of the last 12 months in relation to trying to clear the legacy backlog has been very helpful in this regard. I think that there are a lot of new ways of working that teams have identified and that has been successful in achieving that objective. I think the fact that we've seen that sort of threefold increase in asylum decision productivity is something that I'm sure you would welcome and colleagues on the committee would welcome too. And I'm really confident that we can deal with the backlog effectively in future, informed by that learning that has gone on. But I am absolutely very willing to engage with colleagues about individual cases that are of concern to them, where there is particular learning that officials can take away and that we can reflect in our processes. I would want us to do that, but there is absolutely no advantage to anybody, candidly, of not getting decisions right at the first available opportunity.
A further example of the low-level incompetence, I had a constituent who was granted her decision in March and only just received her paperwork this week. How is that acceptable in any way?
You'll appreciate that I'm not going to kind of casework an individual case in a select committee, but what I will say is that I would always want paperwork to be issued in an expeditious way following on from a decision being made.
Yes.
And I will very gladly, if you provide me with the specifics of that case, dig into that and provide you with an answer.
In a task in your new role, that is going to be a critical thing, I think, because my experience through the cases that I deal with is this low-level incompetence is absolutely rife in your department. In terms of the other schemes, I can see from the list that you're responsible for the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme as well. Is the statistic that for every 17 Afghans coming in on a small boat, only one of them came in on a government scheme?
So you will appreciate, and I think Minister Mercer's statement this afternoon is welcome, and we remain committed to fulfilling our commitments under the ACRS When it comes to small boat arrivals, I could not be clearer that nobody needs to get in a small boat to pay a criminal gang to put their lives at risk in order to be in safety. All of those individuals are coming from what is a fundamentally safe country and have often travelled through several safe countries in order to embark on those journeys. What we cannot do, of course, is to host 40 million Afghans in this country, which is the total population. But what we will continue to do is to work constructively to provide as much sanctuary as we possibly can. We have continued to work in a cross-government way on this issue with the Ministry of Defence, with other departments in government, including the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. We want to play our part in responding to that situation in Afghanistan, particularly prioritising those who've worked with the UK government. And you'll appreciate why that is important, and you will, I hope, recognise the steps forward that we've taken today to facilitate the next steps in undertaking that work.
I was in for the statement today, and it didn't give me or my constituents any particular reassurance at all, actually. So to give an example, which I made yesterday, I have a constituent whose family fled Afghanistan, are in Pakistan. They have no paperwork because they had to run for their lives. What's their safe and legal route to the UK?
Oh, God. Run for your life! Run for your life!
What's their safe and legal route to the UK?
They run for their life, but they took a bus, train, taxi and everything. They didn't use Shanks and Pony once.
United Kingdom. My point would be that people should look to avail themselves where they qualify for the through the routes that we have got, including the Afghan.
The safest country.
They cannot ask the Taliban for a passport. What is their safe and legal route to reunite with family in Glasgow?
We continue to work in partnership with the UNHCR around the UK resettlement, and we will continue to support around this important endeavour however we can as a UK government, building on the steps that we've already taken to try and facilitate getting Afghans to this country, to helping them to safety. And that speaks to, I think, the important work that has been carried out by this government that has seen over 500,000 people from around the world coming from conflict areas here in the United Kingdom and providing sanctuary in recent years, which is a significant number, and I think is something that all of us are immensely proud of.
What you're telling me, there is no safe and legal route for this family, is there?
What I'm saying to you is that
no, and why should we be legally obligated to do it?
Around the UK
why?
Resettlement.
We can't look after our own, let alone anybody else.
That needs to be done in a joined up way. We want to ensure that people who come to the UK seeking sanctuary are properly supported, are properly integrated, have proper opportunity, have proper accommodation, and candidly, that work is made more difficult by the nature of the small boat crossings that we've seen and the enormous resource that goes into dealing with that issue. But I can absolutely give her the undertaking that in this role I will look at what more we can do through the UK resettlement scheme.
I'd like to know, since we've had these influx of the boat people, is how many more people have gone on to the MI5, MI6 watch list?
Coming from conflict zones in various parts of the world.
Be interesting, wouldn't it?
Finally,
because that costs money a day.
Leaves expect a response to the Brookhouse inquiry?
I will take that request away and provide an update to the committee.
Waiting since September.
Thank you. Tim Lawton. Ministers, just before I come to Tim Lawton, we understand there may be some votes coming up, and we just wanted to check whether how much time you have available.
What's the time now?
15:47.
15:47. Are we already 15 minutes over?
Minutes over what? No, you're due to be here for 2 hours.
Until when? So votes
well,
now?
2:30 till 4:30, 2 hours.
4:30.
Till when?
Can you stay later is what I'm asking, because there may be some votes coming up.
On wind-ups at the moment.
Wind-ups at the moment. I can stay until 4:30. I can stay for the 2 hours.
You can't stay any longer?
I personally can't, no.
Okay, Minister Pursglove, can you
because
stay a
he's
bit
been
longer?
grilled enough.
Until 5 o'clock.
Right, thank you. Okay. Thank you. Tim Lawton.
Thank you. Ministers, on any questions on Radio 4 last week, the Minister for Common Sense, Esther McVeigh, said that the government is not increasing safe routes. she was wrong, wasn't she?
As you know,
I'm just going to flick
Mashie,
through the parliamentary
well
page.
recall as engaging on
see if
these
there's any
matters
votes coming up.
when I held a previous role and was taking through the Nationality and Borders Act, and you have regularly pressed us to do more around safe and legal routes. So, as you'll recognise, we've got the consultation ongoing around the cap. We've extended that consultation until the 9th of January. That will include the UK resettlement scheme. It will include community sponsorship, where there are people willing and keen to come forward and provide placements, and we would be very willing to match people to those, as well as the sort of latest stages of the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme, pathways 2 and 3. That cap is amendable. It'll come into force, I suspect, in 2025, and I would make the point that within the parameters of all the challenges that we are grappling with, we have got a proud record as a country of providing sanctuary to people. We want to build on that. We want to continue to see those opportunities provided. We want to see people come here through safe and legal routes. We do not want people putting their lives in the hands of...
I think we know that. In the interest of the time...
There's also a Human Rights Joint Committee meeting that was taking place.
We are
subject
very willing
is
to facilitate greater opportunity through safe and legal
Daesh
routes in a way that
inquiry,
I think
human rights at work, human rights of asylum seekers in the UK.
But what I'm not going to do is preempt what the outcome of that consultation might be. Because
you don't have to preempt the outcome of the consultation, which hasn't finished yet. You just have to confirm what was in the legislation in the Illegal Migration Bill, which committed the government to producing additional safe and legal routes, to launch a consultation and to lay a report to Parliament by the 20th of January. You've now extended the consultation with local authorities, which I gather has only been with local authorities?
That consultation has been extended with local authorities.
Right, but you're not consulting with anybody else at the moment,
we want to ascertain what capacity is available out
I understand
there,
that.
and what needs could be met in individual communities.
I understand that. I think Mr Hobbs is...
correct. It's local authority. The consultation is with local authorities only. They can work with various suppliers within their local authority to manage their response.
Right, I understand that. So I think the worry is...
I think in letter and in spirit, that agenda is being taken forward.
Okay. In which case, your colleague was wrong, because she's caused some confusion.
Well, you're asking me to comment on an interview that I admittedly haven't heard. All I can say
I quote you chapter and verse. You only have to say whether she's right
or not on the basis
of you're now the minister
all the
responsible
foreign
for
security guards
in the bill.
how
they
are
which
treating
obliges the government
British
to produce
homeless
a report
on the
by
streets
the 20th
now.
Of January,
and people are just allowing it. Most of these
people
people can't speak English
say that we are
or not very good English, and look how they treat the people after we've given these people a leg up.
In July of this year, and specifically the
and we're
amendment
called the
which
racist.
led on, which the government accepted. The concern...
Letter and in spirit.
Good. So, right, from that I will extrapolate that Estimate V was wrong. The concern is that the consultation, which is an important consultation, which is one to do with capacity, which is why local authorities are key to that, but it's also...
They need to traffic people into the country because they need the votes.
The makeup and formula and character of those safe and legal
most of these
routes for
migrants are going to be the next Labour voters
because
they all align with socialist workers' parties and things like that.
And the consultation has not involved refugee and other NGO organisations who are dealing with the potential...
Look at how many Palestinians we have. They're all going to be voting Labour, aren't they?
Certainly in my extensive conversations with the Minister, as well as what was said in the debate, was that this consultation would take in a wide range of organisations so that there would be a much better informed report on how those safe and legal routes would actually take place. Why hasn't that happened?
Well, I wasn't privy to those conversations that you had.
They're on the floor of the House in some cases.
And we will want to obviously carefully consider what capacity local areas can offer, how they believe that they can meet the needs that exist, and how they would like to go about providing support. But I'm sure that as part of that, we will want to layer on all of that expertise and all of that insight to make sure that in delivering on those commitments,
Yaki Da did
we
a
can do that in the
video
most joined up and
yesterday,
effective way
or
to
so, I
overcome
think
sorts
it's
of
yesterday or
issues.
the day
Still
before
committed to
yesterday,
20th January for
where the
annual
old Bill
report,
arrested a
because you've now got
homeless guy
11
on a section
days,
35. You know,
from the extended
watch
consultation date until your
Mental.
obligation under that legislation to lay a report before Parliament on the safe and legal route.
yeah, I think it was a homeless guy
You're not
in
going to
Swansea.
miss that deadline, are you?
So that is on the cap, is my understanding.
No,
And of
it's a
course, in
consultation.
responding to the kind of wider opportunity around establishing safe and legal routes, we will need to
Consultation-
ponder what is possible
The
and
consultation
make
is to
announcements appropriately.
right. The consultation is to inform the report which you are obliged to lay before Parliament by the 20th of January on any existing and new safe routes that you are planning. That's what the report needs to say by the 20th of January. It will be produced by the 20th of January.
Be
won't
the
it?
Green and Labour Party coalition government.
Right.
Just fucking
And
imagine.
you are on course to fulfil your statutory obligations to turn that report into actual safe and legal routes, which have to be in force in 2024, as promised on numerous occasions by your predecessors.
That advice has not come across my desk as yet, but I'm sure that it will.
So, since the royal assent for the Illegal Migration Act, 13,599 people have arrived, who will be covered, therefore, by this legislation. So you've got another potential backlog stacking up on the original backlog, which you're still working through. Is it likely that you will again change the retrospective cut-off date in order not to have an additional backlog, which you've then got to sort out?
This is the illegal migration act.
He was given a section
Hobbs can help
35
with
as a
that.
dispersal order. He was given a
I think you're referring
dispersal.
to
He didn't
the
move fast
retrospective
enough
nature of the
by
illegal
the looks of things,
migration
and the old
act
Bill
that
nicked
goes
him.
back to the rules applying to the date of royal assent. To support the Minister, it is not something that we have discussed with them yet in terms of the approach and to when the full act is operationalised. That will be a decision for ministers, but the current rules as set out in the legislation are that the duty is retrospective to the date of royal assent.
Right, so those 13,599 people are subject to the terms of the Illegal Migration Act as it stands. When the Illegal Migration Act came in, the government abandoned the previous retrospective applications from last year, didn't it? Is it planning?
It changed the date from the date of introduction to the date of royal assent.
Correct. Is it likely to do that again so as to avoid having a further backlog, starting with the 13,599 so far, do you think?
I think that's a decision that ministers
We have
will
to suspend
take.
the session at this point.
Going for a vote.
Suspended.
So we'll just wait for this to come back. So go make a copy and then head on back. Should be back shortly, guys, once they've all passed through the relevant lobbies to which way they're going to be voting in whatever vote they're voting on. So just go make yourself a coffee, do what you need to do, but stay tuned. And also remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button, especially if you're new around here, because 46% of my viewers are not subscribed. They must be having a coffee break as well, guys. Well, a clone of him didn't do a live stream once, did they? That's why I banned him. He knows what he done. And how would he know they were typing racist stuff? Because I got rid of the messages straight away. Weird that. This thing ends at 4:30, so they must be coming back, because it would have said this transmission has ended, not suspended. This is longer than expected, guys. I didn't realise they were going to have such a long suspension. They should be back because this is scheduled until 16:30. But do go off and do what you need to do, make a brew, roll whatever you need to, and stay tuned. Can you enlighten us on what they were voting on today? I don't have a clue. I tried to have a look through, but couldn't really see anything. So they should be filtering in momentarily then. They will only have another 15 minutes of this meeting. As Ben has just said in the chat, another division has just been called, so they have to vote again, go through the lobbies again. So this meeting might not go ahead again today because obviously Tomlinson or Tomlin, the new Borders MP or whatever, is got to finish at past, so there's no lateness tonight, so we'll just wait and see for the next few minutes. We just let it run a minute to see what happens, like Bennett said. Another 15 minutes at least to vote again, and then for the votes to come back, to be called. So it might not. If it doesn't, I shall come back and just end the stream and say goodbye, but we just leave it for another 15. But didn't the MP say that he couldn't stay later than 4:30, which was the allotted 2 hours for the debate? Oh, sorry, not debate, the meeting. Yeah, but at the end of the day, mate, this is MPs we're talking about. The longer they stay, the more they get paid. They can claim in expenses, can't they? Get their evening meal allowance tonight then, surely. Just to recap on what the committee's been saying, they couldn't agree on the figures on how many Albanians were sent back between 2020 to now. The Prime Minister's figures were set at some 5,000, but that 5,000 included the total number of Albanians who may have been in the country for decades and overstayed their visas, so they came in legal means, but overstayed their vehicles. They have been lumped together. But they're saying since 2020, some 500 have been sent back, a total of 408. So I don't know where the two such numbers are coming from. Is it 408 people total that's been sent back that's coming on the boat? We don't know. They're just shirking around the figures. So we'll just wait and see. But you've also got to remember, you know, this minister's only been in, day 3 of his post, and, you know, you can't blame him for not being able to have these figures off the top of his head. But I've said, surely these are the figures that you want on hand, because these are the figures that people want answers to straight away. They want to know the total number of people and how many total number of people that you've sent back to their originating countries. Because everyone that sails across from France should be sent back to France anyway, because that was a safe country. You know, we're going off of the whole fact that, you know, we shouldn't be taking them from France. End of. Gonna be called a racist for saying it, but we wouldn't have allowed Hitler to sail across the channel, would we? You know, but we're allowing all these undocumented males to enter this country, and we don't know nothing about them. You know, let's just saying that Al Qaeda and terrorist cells have never really gone away. They've just became dormant and quiet, waiting for the next time we become vulnerable and through our own stupidity where they can influx. I'm not saying everyone's bad, but you've got to think about, you know, I think on worst case scenarios to keep the country safe, because that's how you should be thinking. At the end of the day, we don't know about these. You know, if Al Qaeda wanted to get, you know, the next terrorist cell into the country, what a better way than just to sail them across the countries, you know, on a dinghy, and then claim asylum, because we don't know who they are. We haven't got a clue. Terrorism is never gone away. It's just gone dormant. Just saying.
It's not your pay grade, but here is your accomplice to take it. So those 13,599 people who have arrived since Royal Assent are therefore subject to the terms of the illegal migration bill, have committed an illegal act, and are therefore subject to some form of detention or recording or whatever, or deporting. What's happening to them?
That is on your...
Sorry. Mr. Lawton, will you please forgive me? And I'm very sorry, and I apologise, Dame Diana. I did say to you beforehand I will be here for longer than 4:30, and please apologies. Mr. Lawton, I missed the beginning of your question.
It's just, I was finishing off what I started before the division.
Yes.
Those 13,599, it may be
Yes.
slightly more now, who've arrived since Royal Assent,
Yes.
have therefore therefore be subject to the terms of the Illegal Migration Act. They have committed an offence and should be therefore subject to some form of detention, restriction or deportation. What's happened to them? Because they're rather in limbo, aren't they?
That is right. The Act has not yet come into force, as we have discussed.
It has.
Well, in relation to the duty, it hasn't. We're talking about the IMA.
The Illegal Migration
Yes.
Act, the date set was Royal Assent.
That's correct. The
At which
retrospective
point
provision,
those
that's
people
right.
would be committing an offence.
Yes.
So we've had 5 months,
Yes.
4 months, which has resulted in 13,599 people who are in limbo because they've not been detained, deported, or restricted in some other way, presumably.
Because you've done
That's
nothing.
Right. It is also right to say, as I stated, that not all of that Act is yet in force. That is right to say.
For those people it is, because they've committed an offence by coming here.
No, in terms of the duty under the Act, that has not yet come into force. Mr. Hobbs may be able to help me out in terms of other provisions that are in force, but I'm thinking first and foremost in relation to the duty to remove.
So Mr. Lawton, are you referring to the illegal arrival offence that was in the Nationality and Borders Act, not the Illegal Migration Act.
So that act came into force
changed-
on the 28th of June 2022.
So the criminal penalties related to illegal arrival were in the Nationality and Borders
Right.
Act, if I remember correctly, and
Terms.
changing the people smuggling. In terms of the duty to remove,
It's not yet in force.
that is not yet in force.
But it is,
It
Mr.
has
Lawton, to your point
uncommenced.
as to whether it is in relation to your point as to the retrospective effect, if you like, of the legislation.
You're going to have a group of people in limbo when it does therefore come into force, if you're saying it didn't, going back to
That is correct.
July of this year.
That is correct.
What is going to happen to that group of people who will form, as I referred earlier, a further backlog effectively?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Lawton, as you've seen in relation to the backlog, that is something that the government has taken very seriously. My colleague, Minister Pursglove, has set out actually some of the progress that has been made, and I've been grateful for the committee to acknowledging that progress. And you're right, we will then need to continue and clear the other cases that are in the system. That is absolutely right.
They are a different status of cases, aren't they?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, can I just come back from one other point, which is in your remit?
Don't we have
Mr.
laws
Pursglove,
already
then?
set in
Because I gather
place
the Home Secretary earlier
to
today
protect
did an
us from
interview
all
and
this
said,
anyway? That
to
no
try
one
and clarify the lack
is
of
actually
clarity
actually said they
over
are acting
the
as
new
if
visa
we've
regulations
never had
and the
immigration
salary,
laws before.
Thresholds, where I'm certainly getting a number of worried constituents who are in the UK already and are saying to me, will they therefore have to leave if they don't have the new 38,000 threshold, whatever it is. Am I right, and is the Home Secretary right then, that he has said that people already in the UK applying for visas will not have to meet the higher salary thresholds going forward?
So I think, as the Home Secretary has said, we are approaching this issue through the prism of these measures not being applied retrospectively, but we will come forward with further detail around those announcements as soon as we're able.
Okay, he seems to have stated quite clearly in an interview earlier today that they will not apply for people already here, i.e. respectively. Not, we're looking at it, not through various prisms, but they will not apply. And clearly people are worried that they may have to up sticks and move quite quickly, potentially, because it takes some time. So is the Home Secretary right or not?
These are important measures that we are taking forward to try and reduce net migration. We believe that, taken with the students package of earlier in the year, that this will reduce net migration by around 300,000.
I don't want the theory behind it. I just want the detail of when it applies.
Set it in some context.
No, we know the context. I just want the detail of whether the Home Secretary
Are
has
they
actually
lumping
made it
students,
clear,
be thinking
and
with
you
the
should know, I
whole
presume, if it's a ministerial policy
thing,
decision,
or is it?
that it will not be retrospectively applied. Therefore,
I'm just
my
interested in
constituent
fucking
who has got a
migrant,
husband from
the
Japan
boat
whose
people.
visa needs to be renewed within a month or so, but their household income does not meet those thresholds, that the new household income targets or thresholds will not apply to them.
So critically important here is that applications that are already lodged are treated under the rules as they are now, but the fact is that we are not intending to apply these measures retrospectively.
So anyone already
So I think
here...
that gives you exactly the precise certainty you're looking for in relation to that case, and
Right.
I'm giving you a very clear steer about where we are going with this in terms of
Okay.
retrospectivity.
Let's go for
So can I just say then, everybody are going to pause that. So everybody has been given an amnesty prior. So everyone new coming in now will be used on the new system, but everyone who's already here will be on the old system. So that's a type of amnesty, isn't it?
Ongoing, effectively.
So no changes have been made as yet to the application. So in answer to the first part of your question, it would be, you're saying that individual will lodge this application in the next month. So in the next month, it'll be treated as it is now. In terms of the future bit, what I will say to you is that I think the Home Secretary has said, and I'm saying again now, that we are not going about this in a retrospective way.
I think you're agreeing with me. So retrospective, so if you're in the country now, you've got your visa, you're legal, but you have to renew the visa, then you'll be able to renew multiple times without being subject to the increased thresholds.
Amnesty then, an amnesty.
To just come forward with the detail in a normal way of making an announcement. But what I'm saying to you is that we do not want to go about this in a retrospective way.
Okay, so it's not super clear, but hopefully it will be super clear before very long. That's a yes then. Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. I just wanted to pick up on that point about the increase in the threshold, and just if you can tell the committee how you arrived at that calculation and how you decided that 38,700 was enough.
I'm all well,
to
thank you, Kingsdale, mate.
So I think there's a few important points to make in relation to this. So the threshold had not been reviewed since 2012, and we think that it is right that periodically that happens. And you'll notice that this very much brings it in line with the skilled worker route. And it's also important to just kind of set this in context in the sense that for individuals to meet that threshold, if somebody is in country, if the dependent is in country with the individual, they are able to meet that threshold through their collective income. Savings and investments can also be taken into consideration when meeting it too. And we think that there is a strong rationale for having a consistency across these various routes. And it may also be that individuals can qualify to come to the United Kingdom under other routes beyond the family visa route that you are asking me about.
But it'd be great if you could share with the committee how you reached the sum of 38,700 as the appropriate level to support families, if you could do that, if that's possible.
So we've brought this into line with the skilled worker route, and I would also
That's
say,
scary, isn't it?
And I think this
The
is
family
important,
visa.
and I recognise that I've just spent the last 12 and a bit
That's
months
scary,
in the Department for
and we
Work
all know how many
Relations, that
people
one
they
of
have
the
in
other
their families.
motivations behind this package, and this is just one element of the package of measures that we set out through that 5-point plan, is that we think that we can do more domestically to try and meet our labour needs. I think that that is exactly the right thing to do. I think there's a moral case for that. I think there is an economic case for that. When you look at the back to work plan, we are putting enormous sums of money in behind meaningful employment support, helping people to take on that work, to have the skills that they need in order to do that. A much greater focus on identifying what people's skills and capabilities are and matching them to the right jobs and really aiding on the retention piece. I think when you look at it in that context, across the 5 measures that have been announced in the last 10 days, actually, this is the right package that moves forward in that holistic sense in terms of trying to meet various policy objectives. But as I say, we think that there is a strong rationale for bringing that minimum income level into line with the skilled worker route. But there are those other aspects that come into play that mean that people are aided in meeting that threshold.
Can you say a little then about what assessments you've carried out in terms of the impact this rise in the threshold will have on those sectors where we have and are seeing a significant underrepresentation of workers, particularly in the care sector?
So obviously the care sector has its own separate routing, and that is important. The sort of health and care visa speaks for itself in terms of meeting some of those needs. But again, I go back to the point, and I feel so passionately,
You got that right, Crusader. No one in that room considers themselves as English. They will call themselves British.
With the right support could take on those
You're
roles.
right.
And we shouldn't be complacent.
Unfortunately, a lot of children today
we've managed to get 1 million
won't call themselves English. They call themselves British. It's not only the politicians, mate. It's what society's done in general. It's what the people have done to the English in general.
In terms of their well-being, in terms of their financial security. And we ought to be doing everything possible to help make that happen. And I'd hope that you would be on that journey with the government.
Yeah, but only when employers are offering, well-paid and secure jobs. Because at the moment, jobs in that sector aren't well-paid and they're not secure, and so that's why so many people don't want them. But we're straining into different territory here at the moment. And
again,
I'll go on.
Can I just pick up on it? Because I think you raise a very valid and legitimate point in relation to the health and care visa. And again, through this package of measures, one of the things we are taking forward is greater oversight, greater accreditation, working very closely with the DHSC and with the Care Quality Commission to make sure that there is proper oversight of this, to make sure that these are meaningful roles, that they are substantive roles, and that people are not being brought to this country on a sort of false prospectus, so to speak, that these jobs are available within fully fledged care outfits with that proper CQC oversight, because I want to achieve exactly what you want to achieve.
That flag
quality roles
there
for people to go into where people are paid properly.
Makes me a racist, doesn't it?
Important principle of people being paid properly.
What more can I
also
say?
Also really speaks to the package that we're taking forward when you look at it in the round.
Minister.
You know,
I want to link you to the letter that the Chair referred to at the beginning of the session, particularly at the last page of that letter under corrections. As I asked the Permanent Secretary about the massive amount of profits that are made by companies who are responsible for asylum accommodation, particularly I cited Serco. And during that meeting, the Minister said that they could only claim back money where the contract failed. But clearly it says in this letter that if those companies do make massive profits, then that it can be drawn back. So I just wanted to know whether the Home Office is actually doing that, given that there are massive profits being made by these companies at this moment in time.
Well, I note from the letter from the Permanent Secretary that the sort of final line of it says that the approach that we're taking, that's described in the letter, ensures that suppliers will only earn the agreed profit margin. I don't think you'll hear any complaint for me about value for money for the taxpayer. I think that is absolutely critical in everything that we do. It's one of the reasons why I do consider this to be an important job in government that I've been asked to take on. My mission is very clear from the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary.
Or about putting it on the side of me house next year when the weather starts to get brightened up, right on the side, massive that flag,
we need
to
to go further. Hotel usage has dropped in recent weeks and months. That is a positive step forward, because I don't want us to be spending money needlessly on this accommodation, and it's precisely why the government is advancing all of the measures that we are taking forward, why it is crucial that we've seen those falls in small boat arrivals, why we do need to tackle people coming here illegally, why it is right to have accommodation sites provided at greater scale.
I think it's 10 by 8 or something like that. It's so much stupid, it's massive.
And I'm determined we've got to get there, is to see there not being a need for precisely these contracts, because we have got these issues under control, and then we don't have the need for the hotels, we don't have the need for the accommodation
Jack, that's
sites,
if they let English flags in.
£8 million a day spend in the asylum system. That's precisely what this government is working towards.
But at the end of the day, Minister, those public and private companies are still making massive amounts of profit from public sector money, and I believe that something needs to be done in terms of challenging that and claiming back
St George,
the profits
the
that companies are making.
I can only, again, refer you back to sort of that little bit of detail that was in the Permanent Secretary's letter. I actually think the best way of addressing this issue is to put these criminal gangs out of business that facilitate the crossings of the Channel, try and really clamp down on the illegal migration that we see, make sure that we get through the backlog in the asylum system as quickly as possible, and that we're not accommodating people for any longer than is necessary. And I look forward to your support in the lobbies for all of that work as we take it forward as a government.
In terms of dealing with the backlog, staff are going to be required to meet the massive demand, and I know there are issues in terms of recruitment and retention of staff. We've seen highly experienced and qualified staff leaving the sector, and I wanted to know whether you thought that those that have been recruited have the necessary skills to deal with these complex cases.
Yes, so there has been a real focus on making sure that staff have the skills that they need in order to be able to deal with the cases that come before them. As I mentioned earlier, there has been a lot of work go on in clearing the legacy backlog that has led to a lot of ways of working that are conducive to achieving that outcome. When it comes to the sort of retention of staff, there's been several steps that have been taken, including the introduction of a recruitment and retention allowance. I know that that is tenure related, and that we're trying to support that retention of decision makers. Pay has increased for decision makers as well, because we recognise that is critically important too in terms of trying to retain members of staff, and also we want to see that productivity. We have seen greater productivity come about, and I know that the productivity has improved to such an extent that on average 7.89 initial decisions have been completed per caseworker per month. And Abby Tierney and her leadership team have done an awful lot of good work, I would argue, over the course of the last 12 months to really try and build that capacity with around 2,500 caseworkers. And so I'm confident that with all of that having been and gone, in terms of all that learning, all of that additional capacity, that as we pivot into that flow caseworking in the new year, that we will really make some progress in getting this head of work down, which is good for your constituents and my constituents and those of colleagues across the committee, because I think, as I said earlier, we want to see certainty for people as soon as possible around decision making.
Going back to asylum accommodation, we all know that it's had a significant impact on local authorities. You know, for my local authority, City of Sanctuary, we will have 1,000 asylum seekers set to receive a decision before Christmas, but sadly without accommodation to meet their needs, and so there's a fear that those people will end up on the streets and possibly dead if the weather continues the way it is. So I just wanted to know how you intend to support local authorities, particularly like mine, who've lost significant amount of funding in the past 13 years, and how you intend to support these asylum seekers.
So just to deal with Christmas specifically, there is a
fuck
sort of
asylum
moratorium
seekers
on
Christmas.
moving people on
What about
over
the
that
fucking
Christmas
homeless
period,
people on the
in the way
street?
that we've seen
You
in
know,
previous years.
they're going to
And
get
I
them
hope
all
that
off
people
of the
are
street at
sure that
Christmas.
Christmas period
I don't give a
specifically,
shit
as you mentioned.
about refugees
also,
and asylum seekers
I've
living on
already
the
said to the
streets.
local
I
government
guarantee
minister
you
that I
no
recognise
asylum
that
seeker
relationships
is
are very
living on the
important
street
as we
or
take
homeless.
forward this work. I recognise that this is challenging, and I will work very closely with him to pick up with local authorities around the relationships piece, to understand what the challenges are, to understand what the needs are, as we seek to sort of take forward this agenda. And undoubtedly, getting through the backlog does inevitably have challenges associated with it when it comes to accommodation. But there are improvements that are in train to ensure that local authorities,
Remember
for example,
to
receive
hit that
early
like button, guys,
notification
if you
of
haven't
those being
already.
granted and leaving accommodation. Again, I think advance notice is helpful. The more notice that we can give, the better that is. And we've also got local authority liaison officers who are a specific point of contact where there are particular challenges, where there are particular difficulties that need to be worked through in order to make sure that someone has the right support. But she can be absolutely assured that, Ms Johnson will be absolutely assured that I want to have constructive relationships with DLUC colleagues around this and with the local government sector. And I think one of the challenges is making sure that we have proper data-driven approaches to this, and some of the heat maps, for example, that we've developed have been helpful to us in doing that.
Could you share my question, Jo?
Could you let us know what the retention rate is for the 2,500 caseworkers?
So I understand that it's 30% at the moment.
The attrition.
It's the attrition.
The attrition rate's 30%.
Currently.
Okay, thank you. Diane Abbott.
I just wanted to ask Mr. Pursglove, actually, about some of the issues in relation to legal migration.
Yeah. Is Abacus Abbott in the room?
Seen the
Abacus Abbott
coverage earlier this week about Afghans. Apparently there are 200 members of Afghan Special Forces who were trained and funded by the UK. They fled to Pakistan, and Pakistan is going to deport them back.
She's wearing all that in support of Palestine and all that shit now.
Their lives will be in danger.
God.
Are you familiar with that story? Are we going to reconsider that?
So I will actually be having conversations with colleagues in other parts of government about these very sorts of issues tomorrow. Of course, we treat this with the utmost seriousness. What you've seen in responding to the crisis in Afghanistan has been a coordinated cross-government effort involving both the Home Office and the Ministry of Defence, as well as colleagues in the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. and we will continue to do everything that we can to support Afghans who've been affected by this exceptionally difficult set of circumstances that have arisen. And so you can, again, be assured that this is very high on my priorities to pick up with ministerial colleagues, and the Home Office will play its part in responding to that challenge.
Of course, not everybody thinks you're doing all you can. I think quoted this week was General Sir Richard Barons, who was in the British Army for 12 years, and he said that the failure to relocate these soldiers back to the UK, open quotes, is a disgrace because it reflects that either we are duplicitous as a nation or incompetent. Neither are acceptable, he said. It is a betrayal.
Of course, we have played a very significant part in the ACI
Can't
scheme.
come with any of her own relevant questions.
Has been led by the Ministry of
So
Defence.
she's reading a
and again,
statement
let
somebody
me
else
absolutely
has
assure
said
you that we will continue to play our part
in a
as the Home
previous
Office
statement
to
that
make
they wrote.
sure that we can deliver on the ambitions that you have, that those respective departments have, to provide that sanctuary for people who need it. And I'm having those conversations in a sort of live manner at the moment.
Okay, because the coverage of this issue has caused a lot of alarm. You know, these are people that worked with us, you know, were side by side with us, and now we don't want to offer them sanctuary of any kind. And if they go back to Pakistan, their lives are in danger.
I'm sure that colleagues in other parts of government, I've heard your strong arguments there directly. I'm sure that other colleagues elsewhere in government will have heard that too and will want to reflect on what you've said.
The other thing I wanted to ask you was about Windrush. Now, you'll be
What the
aware
fuck
this
is
is
Windrush got to
a
do with this?
long-standing issue in terms of compensation, and there's a concern about it really because in the nature of things, the victims of Windrush are getting increasingly elderly. Because by and large, these people came in the 60s and 70s. Are you able to tell me how many people you've given compensation to, how much compensation it has amounted to, and also how many people are on your waiting list to get compensation?
So by way of an update, the total paid or offered to individuals through the scheme has increased to over 79 million. 67.59 million has been paid across 1,820 claims, and a further 11.71 million has been offered, awaiting acceptance.
Work that out per person, what they got.
Also show that over 72% of claims have had a final decision. But again, I want us to be as expeditious as possible in dealing with those issues, because I recognise the importance of getting this right for those individuals and making sure that they receive the compensation to which they deserve.
Was that 67 million?
I mean, you've told me who you've got.
Spread across 1,800 claims or 18,000 claims?
I would need to.
I'm sure that was
go away and check
1,800
that
claims,
figure
he said.
Mr. Hobbs
Yeah, so
has got
I had some figures, the latest figures in terms of there are 1,684 decisions pending, of which 105 are over 18 months and 92 are over 12 months.
Okay. So how long do you think it's going to take to resolve this? The worry is that some of these people will reach, you know, a stage in their life before they...
I've got a relative who's getting really old, and I'm in a will, and I need the inheritance.
So the applications remain open, so it's open for people to continue to apply. So a number of those cases will still be under the 3 to 6 month phase, because there's no closure in terms of applications. So as I said, I gave the figures for over 18 months. It's not directly managed by the immigration functions in the Home Office, but as the Minister said, I think our commitment is to deal with those cases as expeditiously as possible.
Okay. Is it possible for you to do a note on where you are? Because people raise it with me, you know.
So I think we published full stats on it last week.
Oh, last week?
Yeah.
Okay.
But let me take away...
you just uncheck your fucking emails, have you? Do you know how to?
Your questions, and if there's any additional information that we can provide, we will do that gladly.
I want to be in a position to tell people where we all stand. I think...
Check your inbox, love.
Thank you. And of course we produced a report on Windrush and made certain recommendations to government, some of which
Yep,
government chose
we've
not
already
to
made
take
a
up, but
report.
we're certainly wanting
report
to keep
that
an eye on the
Abbott
progress, and in
hasn't
particular
read
about
clearly.
not just the Caribbean, but other parts of the world where there could be claims under Windrush.
Yeah.
And we were concerned that not enough activity had been undertaken to identify people. So we would welcome any information about that. Simon Fell.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome, Ministers. And I apologise for not rushing back as quickly as I could have done. I was trying to save a library by delivering a petition in the chamber. So,
important constituency.
Indeed. Thank you. So I've got a few questions around legal migration, Minister Pursglove. So obviously we had the statement from the Home Secretary last week. He said that migration to his country is far too high and it needs to come down. What does success look like for you?
So I think it is fair to say that the package that was set out just prior to my arrival in the department last week is a
Even
good
the
package
Russians
that
can
moves
conquer
forward in
Afghanistan.
responding
It's never
to
been
the
conquered,
challenge
is
that
it?
people are rightly laying down to us of reducing net migration, doing that in a sustainable manner, while still ensuring that businesses and employers have the skills that they need. The overall package of measures, when you take into account also the announcement that was made in May and the delivery of that announcement around students, is around 300,000 reduction in net migration. That is something that I am determined as the Minister for Legal Migration to see through in conjunction with the Home Secretary, and that is a pressing priority for the department. And I think it should also be, as I touched on a little earlier, seen in the context of the work that is going on in government elsewhere, particularly around the Back to Work plan and all of the employment support that is being provided. We should not be complacent as government. I think businesses and employers should continue to engage and work constructively with us to see what more they can do to meet their skill needs through the domestic population here in the UK. And as government, we are really backing that work. And so for me, getting on and delivering that 300,000 reduction is going to be mission critical. But I also want it to sort of be seen in the context of that other work that's going on, and also making sure that we're working in a joined up way with other government departments.
Thank you, and I'll come back to you on the skills piece, because that is a crucial part of the package. It's almost as important as the numbers themselves. But the Home Secretary talked about spring as being the date that this would come in. Obviously a key thing for the businesses you referred to, care home providers, or indeed people who are looking forward to getting married in the future. What they need to know is when that date is in spring so they can plan. Can you give us an indication of what that looks like?
So I am endeavouring, along with the Home Secretary, to come forward as quickly as possible in providing that information that you are seeking, to give that certainty.
And how quickly do you think that endeavour will deliver results for us?
I can't get drawn any further than that, but you can be assured that I will come forward at the first possible moment to provide that clarity for you.
We very much look forward to it. Thank you. The impact assessment for the new points-based system for skills workers was published in November 2020. When are we expecting an economic impact assessment of the proposed changes?
So my understanding of that is that, again, when we're in a position to announce the latest set of immigration rules, we will provide that economic impact assessment alongside it.
Okay, so we're looking at that same date.
It's also subject to a number of the measures are subject to the review by the Independent Migration Advisory Committee. So both in terms of the future of the shortage occupation list and the review of the graduate route, they are the government asked for the Migration Advisory Committee to review those. So it will be subject to them also completing their review.
Thank you. And with regards to care workers, so the announcement again from spring around their ability to bring dependents into the UK. Can you talk a bit about the evidential base for that decision?
So what I can say to you is that in relation to around 100,000 care workers, what we saw was 120,000 dependents coming with them. And I think that most people would think, rightly, that is not a sustainable situation, and that is a very considerable number of dependents who are coming with those care workers. I think that, again, I make no apology for making the point that I think we can do more domestically to try and help support more people into those careers with all the right skills to take on those really important caring roles. I think that we shouldn't be complacent about that. I think we should work on a cross-government basis to try and achieve it. I know that colleagues in the Department of Health and Social Care subscribe to that view as well. And I also want to see people paid properly for that work. And I also think that it's right that we tighten that route to sort of guard against some of the perceived exploitation of it, and to just have this in a better balance, in a better proportion.
You're queuing me up very nicely for my next question, which I appreciate. So the Migration Advisory Committee released its annual report today. It had a helpful reminder in it. We had them in front of this committee about 18 months ago, I think it was. And it had a helpful reminder in it that in their 2021 annual report, they suggested that health and care workers should be added to the shortage occupation list. But that was as part of a suite of 19 recommendations. And I'm just going to quote direct from their annual report. We were clear that immigration could not solve the workforce issues alone. Our main recommendation was to introduce a minimum rate of pay, initially at £1 an hour above national minimum wage for care workers in England, to help tackle the workforce issues faced by the sector in the medium to long term. To date, the government has not responded to or implemented any of those recommendations as part of a social care package. Why not?
So we said that the sort of introduction of care workers through the route was intended to be a short-term measure. I have seen the sort of introductory letter that has gone to the Home Secretary from the Migration Advisory Committee with this report today. You'll appreciate that I haven't yet had the opportunity, I think it's 60 pages long, I've not yet had the opportunity to fully digest the 60 pages that have come in alongside that, not least because I wanted to be at the committee on time this afternoon to engage with all of you. But what I most certainly will be doing is engaging with the Migration Advisory Committee in the weeks and months ahead. I consider that to be an important part of this role, and I think that I am very willing to consider what further steps we can take to build on the work that is already ongoing, that is already in flight, to try and shift the dynamic when it comes to net migration. And again, really thinking hard about how we can work in a joined up way across government, informed by some of that expertise and insight from the MAC about what more we can do to try and support people domestically to take on these roles and to ensure that we're paying people properly.
And look, I appreciate that, and I'm sure that is with good intention, but I'm not going to directly quote you, but your words from only a few minutes ago were we need to get the balance in the system right. And part of this system is about paying people more, so more people in the UK want to do these jobs. We're not fulfilling that part of the bargain, but yet it looks like we're turning the tap off at the other side of the equation. And I just want to check what the reasoning is why we're making this structural change to such a crucial part of our infrastructure without laying the groundwork beforehand.
So we believe that we can do this in a managed and proportionate way. But Mr. Hobbs, I don't know if you've got any sort of insights around this in terms of the policy formulation that went before.
Only to repeat, as you said, I think what ministers were balancing when they took the decision on this was supporting the sector, and it was a relatively new introduction, the health and social care visa, as the minister said, to deal with short-term challenges. The numbers were significant in terms of the intake for those jobs, and then also the associated dependents, and the proportion of dependents to applicants was distinctly different in terms of other skilled routes and if you look at the salary level. And so I think the ministers examined a package and sought to balance between the desire to bring down net migration, ensure that communities and infrastructure was there to support those individuals, but also support the sector and the needs of both the health and the social care sector.
Thank you. Okay, if I just move on to skilled workers elsewhere, because I know we're pushing right up against time. I'm very grateful for your tolerance there. So if I use a constituency example, I know you said earlier you don't want to do constituency casework. I'm not going to give you any casework here, but I have the last producer.
I'm always happy to help colleagues with constituency. I wouldn't want people to think I'm not willing to help colleagues with constituency casework. It's always difficult to sort of debate.
There's a letter in the post
specific
already
circumstances in public without having all the background to it.
There's a letter in the post already to you.
Right,
so
well, I will keep an eye out for that.
So I have the last producer of lead crystal in the UK. They are a very, very specialist business. The employees there, or the skills of the employees there, are listed as an endangered craft. It takes 15 years to train a production glass blower and 5 to 7 years to train a glass cutter. We simply do not have these skills in the UK anymore. There are no businesses in the UK to train them other than the one that's in operation, and because there are no qualified assessors, they can't get apprenticeships up and running. So they're in a bind. They have to import people in from overseas, countries like Prague, where they have a skills base like that. But the threshold that's being set is simply not going to work for them. It would mean increasing wages across the business by 30%. This will push them out of business. What would you suggest businesses like that do?
So we will need to take forward these measures carefully and take on board those sorts of observations. What I would say is that I think there are opportunities around skills. I think there are opportunities around automation. I think there are opportunities around productivity that we ought to be fully exploring and trying to take forward in a coordinated way. And I think also, obviously here, quite a lot of cases for specific professions and for particular types of work. It is worth just remembering that this isn't the only route, and that when you consider that there are Ukrainians, there are dependents, there are people on the EUSS scheme, youth mobility schemes, and individuals who have general work rights, and students can work too, who could take on some of the roles in some of the professions that often we hear about, or particular types of work. But around that very specific example that you've mentioned, I would be really happy to engage with you on it and understand from your sort of constituency perspective your views on that and what those challenges might be.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that, and I'm aware we're running up to time, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Just before we conclude, I just wanted to ask Minister Tomlinson about the information that became available at the end of last week in terms of the MEDP with Rwanda.
Yes.
The £120 million that was paid up front that we knew about, the 20 million that was then paid in addition, and then we've learnt about the £100 million that was spent, that was sent to Rwanda in April, and a further £50 million to be sent next April.
In the future, that's right.
Could you just confirm, is there any other payment that will be due in the financial year 24-25?
24-25, you have all the information that is there and up to date. That is.
That's the totality of the money that will be spent, the 50 million.
Up to the end of that financial year.
For that financial year.
Yes,
and then in the following financial year, what payment will go then?
Those details will be released in due course.
So it sounds like
in the ordinary way, Dave.
But you will know that there's been a lot of disquiet about the fact that there hasn't been the information
you're right. And there was a letter
available.
you're absolutely right, and there was a letter subsequently written to you following those concerns.
Yes.
That is absolutely right.
So you're saying to me today that there's £50 million that will be spent next April, but you can't say whether any further payments will be made?
That is correct.
Okay, and in the following year, there will be a payment. Is that you're willing to admit there is going to be a payment in the final year?
I'm willing to say that the figures will be released in the usual way, in the ordinary manner.
Very unsatisfactory.
Well, I don't see why that is. This is the ordinary accounting procedure. This is the way...
I think we'll take issue with that, because that's not the approach that the Public Accounts Committee took on Monday when they were questioning the Permanent Secretary on that. Can I just ask, were there conditions attached to the money? These sums of money?
In relation to what?
Were they conditions attached as to what they could be spent on?
That's something that I would have to go and find out and reflect upon.
Will you write to the committee and let us know whether there were conditions?
Are you asking me to write to the committee, Dame Diana? I will write to the committee.
Yes, so we'd like to know about any conditions that were attached to the money that was sent under the MEDP. The permanent secretary was able to give us a breakdown of the money that was, how the money was spent in terms of education, accommodation, I think agriculture. There were percentages he was able to give to the committee at the Public Accounts Committee on Monday. So I would appreciate knowing if there were conditions about what could be spent, whether that was in terms of total amounts or percentages, but it would be helpful to know if there was conditionality attached.
I will follow up as I said I would.
And if there's any other information about
doesn't
what
know a
happens
lot
with
of
the break
stuff, does he?
clause as well, and what proportion of any
FM.
payments made could be returned, that would be helpful to know as well.
Received and understood.
Thank you. And just on the Bibby Stockholm,
Right, here we go.
I mentioned earlier on about the £22,450,772. Does that include the port, any port fees and any mooring fees and anything else that needs to be paid? Do you know?
I think, if I may, we will just check definitively on that point before saying it. And again, as we had a bit of a debate about earlier, we are reviewing that value for money evaluation. So let me just check that everything is included, because I want to make sure we give you a full and thorough answer to those questions.
And do you think you could also write to the committee about you've mentioned the backlog, so the flow backlog, not the legacy backlog, which you say will be cleared by the end of the year, but the flow backlog. Could you write to the committee with your expectation about how quickly that will be cleared, and what the expectation would be for how long a claim would take to be processed?
So, in terms of the overall asylum backlog, what I can say very quickly for the committee's benefit is that is down 16% in the last 12 months. It stood at 109,442 at the year ending the 30th of November 2023. But I am looking at what more we can do to provide sort of greater insight and expectations for people who are in the asylum system about when they would expect for their claim to be dealt with. And I think, having sort of demonstrated what we have through the legacy backlog performance, to me it seems that there is a lot of learning there that we can apply as we seek to deal with that overall asylum backlog that I think all of us want to see dealt with. And with that, I hope that we'll be able to sort of provide greater assurance to people around the sort of expectations that they can reasonably have around timings.
And those figures include the 13,000 that Mr. Lawton was talking about.
So that obviously includes. Can I just check on this operationally?
My understanding is that's because the flow is cut off from the point of the Illegal Migration Act. Yeah. So it's from the Nationality and Borders Act to the Illegal Migration Act.
Right. So there's the 109,000, did you say, and then this 13,000 that's building up in a separate backlog. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. So there are arrivals since the Illegal Migration Act for which new rules will apply when the Act is fully commenced.
Yeah, so in fact there's three backlogs. There's the legacy backlog, the flow backlog, and then the third backlog is post the Illegal Migration Act. Is that right? Mm-hmm. You've got three separate backlogs.
There's sort of three cohorts of cases there, isn't there?
Yeah, right, okay. Yeah. Well, can I thank you very much indeed for appearing this afternoon. We look forward to a very constructive relationship with you in your new roles, and may I wish you all the very best, because you've certainly got some challenges to deal with.
And there goes the vote bell again.
Thank you.
So they need to go out for a vote.
The proceeding
and I do believe sorry about that, guys. Do apologise if you all got a little bit blasted out then. I do thank you all for joining me for the last few hours. Let's say thank you to a few people. Roz P, thanks for joining. Happy Girl, Boxing Ban, and everyone else that is still in the chat. Until the next time, guys, thanks for joining me. I'm going to end it here. I'm going to have me tea. But I do appreciate you joining me. Remember to like, share and subscribe. Mainly subscribe if you're new around here. Until the next time. See you soon.